Welcome back to Try Not to Cry, where we share the most heart-wrenching and soul-stirring love stories that'll tug at your heartstrings. I'm your host, and today, we're diving into an epic tale of love, betrayal, and redemption that spans the romantic streets of Paris to the sunlit cliffs of Santorini. Meet Ethan Moreau, a man whose world crumbles when he uncovers his fiancée Sophia's shocking secrets, infidelity, lies, and a tragedy that changes everything. Will he find the strength to heal, or will heartbreak define him? Grab your tissues, because this emotional roller coaster will leave you speechless. Let's get started. Chapter 1. The Night That Changed Everything. The city of Paris shimmered under a velvet night sky, its lights dancing like stars fallen to earth. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of a chic apartment in the 7th arrondissement, the Eiffel Tower stood sentinel, its golden glow casting a romantic haze over the room. Ethan Moreau, a 29-year-old architect with dreams as vast as the Seine, stood by the window, a glass of Bordeaux in hand. His dark hair was slightly tousled, his green eyes reflecting the city's luminescence. 3 years ago, he had moved to Paris from Boston, chasing a career and a love that felt like destiny. That love was Sophia Laurent, the woman who had stolen his heart under the Tuscan sun and promised him forever. Tonight, though, something felt off. The apartment, usually alive with Sophia's laughter or the soft strum of her guitar, was eerily quiet. She was curled up on the cream-colored sofa, her auburn hair spilling over a throw pillow, her phone clutched tightly even in sleep. Ethan's gaze lingered on her, a pang of adoration mixed with unease. They had built a life here, dinners at Le Jules Verne, walks along the Pont Alexander III, plans for a future that included a ring he was saving for. Yet, the past few weeks had brought a subtle shift. Sophia was distracted, her smiles less frequent, her excuses more elaborate. Ethan sipped his wine, the rich notes of blackberry and oak doing little to quell the knot in his stomach. He glanced at the clock on the mantel, 1:47 a.m. The city outside was alive, but inside, a storm was brewing. He couldn't pinpoint why, but the air felt heavy, like the moment before a lightning strike. His architect's mind, trained to see patterns, was picking up on details he wished he could ignore. Sophia's late nights at work, her guarded phone, the way her eyes darted away when he asked about her day. He crossed the room, his bare feet silent on the polished hardwood. Setting his glass on the coffee table, he sat beside Sophia, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She stirred but didn't wake, her breath soft and even. For a moment, he was transported back to Florence, to the night they'd danced under the stars on the Ponte Vecchio, her laughter echoing in his soul. That was the Sophia he loved, the one who made him believe in fairy tales. But now, doubt gnawed at him like a splinter under his skin. Ethan leaned back, his eyes drifting to Sophia's phone. It lay in her hand, the screen dark but somehow menacing, like a Pandora's box waiting to be opened. He'd never been the jealous type. Trust was the foundation of their relationship, or so he'd thought. But lately, that trust had been tested. 2 nights ago, her phone had buzzed at 3 a.m., and when he'd groggily asked who it was, she'd snapped, "Just work, Ethan. Go back to sleep." Work? At 3 a.m.? She was a marketing consultant for a London-based firm, but even their deadlines didn't justify such hours. He rubbed his temples, trying to silence the voice in his head. "Don't do it, Ethan. Don't be that guy." But the voice was drowned out by another, louder one. What if she's hiding something? His heart raced, a mix of guilt and curiosity warring within him. He glanced at Sophia again, her face serene in sleep, and felt a stab of shame. This was the woman he wanted to marry, the one he'd imagined growing old with in a vineyard in Provence. But the buzzing of her phone last night, and the night before, had planted a seed of doubt that was now sprouting into something ugly. Ethan stood, pacing the room. The apartment was a testament to their shared dreams, sketches of his architectural designs pinned to a corkboard, her vintage Polaroids of their travels taped to the fridge. A photo of them in Santorini, her arms around his neck, grinned down from a shelf. But now, those memories felt like relics of a different life. He stopped by the window again, the Eiffel Tower mocking him with its romantic glow. Paris was supposed to be their city, but tonight, it felt like a stage for a tragedy he hadn't rehearsed. He turned back to Sophia, her phone still in her grip. The temptation was overwhelming, a siren call he couldn't resist. Just one look, he told himself. just to put my mind at ease." His hand hovered over the phone, trembling. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. He knew that touching that phone could change everything, but the not knowing was tearing him apart. Ethan's fingers brushed the phone, the cool glass sending a jolt through him. He glanced at Sophia, half expecting her to wake and catch him in the act. But she remained still, her breathing steady, oblivious to the betrayal he was about to commit, not against her, but against the trust they'd built. He gently pried the phone from her hand, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it would wake her. The screen lit up at his touch, revealing a lock screen photo of them in Venice, their smiles frozen in a moment that now felt like a lie. He knew her passcode, her mother's birthday, a detail she'd shared early in their relationship. Typing it in felt like signing a contract with the devil. The phone unlocked, and a flood of notifications greeted him, messages, emails, and a string of alerts from apps he didn't recognize. His stomach churned as he opened the messaging app, his thumb hovering over the first conversation. The name at the top was Lucas, his best friend since high school, the one who'd flown from Boston to Paris last year to celebrate Ethan's birthday. It's probably nothing, Ethan told himself, but his hands were shaking as he scrolled through the thread. The messages were a punch to the gut, flirtatious banter, suggestive emojis, and a photo of Sophia in a dress Ethan had bought her, captioned, "Miss you already." The timestamp was from last week, when Ethan had been working late on a project for a cathedral restoration in Reims. He scrolled further, each message a dagger, plans to meet at a hotel in Montmartre, Lucas joking about how clueless Ethan was. The words blurred as tears stung his eyes. But Lucas was just the beginning. Another conversation, this one with Victor, Sophia's boss, was even more explicit, with details that made Ethan's skin crawl. Then there was Noah, their neighbor from down the hall, and Julian, the gay friend Sophia had sworn was platonic. 4 men, 4 separate lives, all intertwined with the woman he loved. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a conspiracy, a secret world she'd built behind his back. Ethan dropped the phone as if it were burning, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The room spun, the Eiffel Tower's glow now a cruel reminder of the dreams he'd pinned on this city. He stumbled to the kitchen, splashing cold water on his face, but it did nothing to wash away the images seared into his mind. Sophia with Lucas, with Victor, with Noah, with Julian, each name a fresh wound. 8 months, the messages had said. 8 months of lies while he worked double shifts, saving for a ring, planning a proposal at the Louvre. He looked at Sophia, still asleep, her beauty now a mask hiding a stranger. How had he missed this? He was an architect, trained to notice details, yet he'd been blind to the cracks in their relationship. The late nights, the vague excuses, the way she'd pull away when he tried to hold her, it all made sense now, a puzzle he wished he'd never solved. Anger surged through him, hot and consuming, but it was laced with something worse, shame. Shame for trusting her, for loving her, for believing they were different. Ethan sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. The phone lay on the floor, its screen still glowing with the evidence of her betrayal. He wanted to wake her, to scream, to demand answers, but the words caught in his throat. What could she say that would undo this? What could anyone say? The life he'd built with her, their Parisian fairy tale, was a house of cards, and he'd just pulled the one piece that brought it all crashing down. He thought of Lucas, his friend of 15 years, laughing behind his back. Victor, the charming boss who'd always seemed too friendly. Noah, the neighbor who'd brought them wine as a housewarming gift. And Julian, whose platonic brunches with Sophia had never raised Ethan's suspicions. The betrayal was a symphony, each player perfectly in tune, and Ethan was the fool who'd bought a ticket to the show. Ethan stood, his legs unsteady, and picked up the phone again. He couldn't stop himself. He needed to know everything, to map the full extent of the betrayal. He scrolled through more messages, each one a confirmation of his worst fears. Plans for a weekend in Amsterdam with Lucas. A late-night meeting with Victor in London. A casual coffee with Noah that ended in his apartment. And Julian, whose messages were the most cutting, mocking Ethan's boring devotion. The clock now read 2:15 a.m., but time felt irrelevant. Ethan's mind raced, plotting his next move. Confront her now? Wait until morning? Or leave, pack his bags, and disappear into the Parisian night. The thought of confrontation terrified him, not because he feared her reaction, but because he feared his own. The anger bubbling inside him was unfamiliar, a beast he didn't know how to tame. He imagined her waking, seeing the phone in his hand, and laughing, as if his pain were a joke. But running wasn't an option either. This was his home, his life, his heart on the line. He needed answers, even if they destroyed him. He set the phone on the coffee table, its screen now dark, and stared at Sophia. The woman he loved was gone, replaced by someone he didn't recognize. Yet, a part of him still hoped, desperately, foolishly, that there was an explanation, a misunderstanding that could salvage their love. The Eiffel Tower blinked in the distance, its light a beacon in the darkness. Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what came next. He would wake her, he would ask, and whatever happened, he would face it, even if it meant losing everything. The night was young, but his innocence was already dead, buried under the weight of a truth he could never unlearn. Chapter 2. The Secret Unraveled. The clock on the mantel ticked past 2 a.m., its soft rhythm a cruel counterpoint to the chaos erupting in Ethan Moreau's heart. He stood frozen in the dimly lit apartment, Sophia's phone clutched in his trembling hand. The Eiffel Tower's golden glow filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor, but its romance was lost on him now. The device in his grip felt like a grenade, its pin already pulled. Ethan, a 29-year-old architect with a mind trained to build dreams, was about to tear his apart. He glanced at Sophia, still asleep on the cream-colored sofa, her auburn hair fanned out like a halo. Her serene expression mocked the storm brewing inside him. 3 years of love, nights spent planning a future, mornings tangled in each other's arms, now hung by a thread. Ethan's green eyes, usually bright with ambition, were clouded with dread. He knew what he was about to do was a betrayal of trust, a line he'd sworn never to cross. But the buzzing of her phone at ungodly hours, her vague excuses, and the distance in her gaze had eroded his resolve. Just one look, he told himself, his breath shallow. Just to prove I'm wrong. His thumb hovered over the phone's screen, the lock screen photo of them in Venice staring back, a memory of gondolas and laughter that now felt like a cruel joke. He typed her passcode, her mother's birthday, each digit a step toward the abyss. The screen unlocked, and a cascade of notifications flooded the display. Messages, emails, alerts from apps he didn't recognize. His heart pounded, a drumbeat of fear and curiosity. He opened the messaging app, his finger hesitating over the first conversation. The name at the top was Lucas, his best friend since high school, the one who'd stood by him through every triumph and failure. Ethan's stomach twisted. Lucas was family, the brother he'd chosen. Surely, this was innocent, a joke, a misunderstanding. But as he scrolled, the truth hit like a sledgehammer. Messages from last week, when Ethan had been working late in Ronce, revealed a side of Lucas he didn't know. "Miss you already," Lucas had written, alongside a photo of Sophia in the red dress Ethan had bought her for their anniversary. The words blurred as Ethan's vision swam, each line a betrayal. Plans to meet at a hotel in Montmartre, Lucas laughing about how. Ethan's too busy to notice. The air grew thin, and Ethan gripped the phone tighter, as if it could anchor him to a reality that wasn't collapsing. Ethan's knees buckled, and he sank onto the floor, the phone still glowing in his hand. Lucas's betrayal was a knife to the heart, but the wound was about to deepen. He scrolled through the messaging app, each new conversation a fresh assault. The next name was Victor, Sophia's boss at the London-based marketing firm. Ethan had met Victor once, at a company gala in Paris, a charming man in his 40s with a smile that lingered too long. Sophia had laughed off Ethan's unease, calling Victor harmless. Now, the messages told a different story. The thread was explicit, filled with details that made Ethan's skin crawl. Victor's messages were laced with authority, as if he owned Sophia. "Meet me at the Savoy next week," followed by a photo of her in lingerie Ethan had never seen. Sophia's replies were playful, almost defiant, as if she reveled in the secrecy. One message, timestamped 2 nights ago, read, "Ethan's working late again." Perfect timing. Ethan's breath hitched, his mind replaying every moment he'd spent slaving over blueprints, believing he was building a future for them. Instead, he'd been funding her double life. He scrolled faster, the words a blur of pain. Victor had sent a voice note, his polished accent dripping with arrogance. "You're too good for that architect, Sophia." "He's predictable." Ethan played it again, the words searing into his soul. Predictable. Was that what he was to her? A safe bet, a fool who trusted too much. The apartment, once a sanctuary, felt like a prison, its walls closing in. He looked at Sophia, her beauty now a mask, and wondered how he'd been so blind. The Eiffel Tower's light flickered outside, as if mocking his naivety. Ethan's hands shook as he closed Victor's thread, but the phone offered no reprieve. Another name caught his eye: Noah, their neighbor from down the hall. Noah, the charming Brit who'd moved in 6 months ago, always quick with a smile and a bottle of wine. Ethan had liked him, invited him over for drinks, laughed at his stories. Now, Noah's messages revealed a different man, one who'd been meeting Sophia in his apartment while Ethan was away. "Last night was fun," Noah had written, followed by a winking emoji. Ethan's stomach churned, the betrayal now a conspiracy spanning his closest circles. Ethan's chest heaved, each breath a struggle against the weight of what he'd uncovered. Lucas, Victor, Noah, and then, the final name, Julian. Sophia's gay friend, the one she'd introduced at a cafe in La Mere, insisting he was just a confidant. Julian, with his sharp wit and easy charm, had seemed harmless, someone Ethan was happy to see Sophia befriend. She'd spent countless brunches with him, always returning with stories of his hilarious dating mishaps. Ethan had never questioned it, never suspected the lie. The messages from Julian were the most cutting, each word a precision strike. "Ethan's so devoted, it's almost pathetic," Julian had written, followed by a laughing emoji. Sophia's reply was a dagger: "He's sweet, but boring. You're way more fun." Ethan's vision blurred with tears, the phone trembling in his grip. Fun. That's what this was to her, a game, a thrill, while he poured his soul into their future. The thread revealed plans for a weekend in Madrid, Julian joking about how they'd keep it low-key to avoid Ethan's suspicion. A photo of Sophia, laughing in a bar Ethan didn't recognize, sealed the betrayal. 8 months. The messages spanned 8 months, a timeline of deceit that overlapped with Ethan's most cherished memories, their trip to Santorini, her birthday dinner at La Tour d'Argent, the night he'd sketched their dream house in Provence. Every moment he'd thought was theirs had been shared with others, a secret world she'd built behind his back. Ethan's mind raced, piecing together the clues he'd ignored: her late nights, her guarded phone, the way she'd flinch when he touched her unexpectedly. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. He dropped the phone onto the coffee table, the clatter loud in the silent apartment. Sophia stirred but didn't wake, her hand twitching as if reaching for the device. Ethan stared at her, a stranger in the body of the woman he loved. The Eiffel Tower's light pulsed outside, a heartbeat in the darkness, but it offered no comfort. He was alone, surrounded by the ruins of a life he'd thought was real. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a symphony, each player perfectly in tune, and Ethan was the fool who'd believed in the music. Ethan staggered to the kitchen, his legs unsteady, and splashed cold water on his face. The icy shock did nothing to dull the pain, a raw, gnawing ache that radiated from his chest. The apartment, once a haven of love, was now a crime scene, every detail tainted by what he'd learned. The corkboard with his architectural sketches, the fridge adorned with Sophia's Polaroids, the photo of them in Santorini, all lies, all props in a play he hadn't known he was starring in. He gripped the counter, his knuckles white, and fought the urge to scream. He thought of Lucas, his best friend, who'd called him brother while plotting behind his back. Victor, the boss who'd shaken Ethan's hand at the gala, all while pursuing Sophia. Noah, the neighbor who'd shared beers with Ethan on the balcony, now a traitor. And Julian, whose friendship was a facade, his mockery the cruelest cut of all. The betrayal was a web, intricate and deliberate, and Ethan was the fly caught in its center. He'd been working double shifts, saving for a ring, dreaming of a proposal under the Parisian stars, while Sophia lived a double life. Ethan's gaze drifted to the window, the Eiffel Tower's glow a bitter reminder of the city's promise. Paris was supposed to be their love story, a canvas for their dreams. Now, it was a graveyard for his trust. He wondered how he'd missed the signs, how his architect's eye, trained to see patterns, had failed him so spectacularly. The late-night calls, the locked phone, the way Sophia's laughter had grown hollow. It was all there, a blueprint of deceit he'd ignored. He returned to the sofa, sitting beside Sophia, the phone now a silent witness to his pain. She murmured in her sleep, her lips curving into a faint smile, and Ethan felt a surge of anger. How could she sleep so peacefully, knowing the secret she carried? He wanted to shake her awake, to demand answers, to make her feel the weight of what she'd done. But fear held him back, not of her, but of himself. What would he do with the truth? Could he survive it? Ethan's hands trembled as he picked up the phone again, unable to resist the pull of the truth, no matter how much it hurt. He scrolled through the messages, each one a confirmation of his worst fears. Lucas's thread revealed a rendezvous in Amsterdam, planned for next month. Victor's messages hinted at a power dynamic, his tone commanding, almost possessive. No's were casual, almost flippant, as if betraying Ethan was just another Tuesday. And Julian's were the most vicious, his words dripping with scorn for Ethan's predictable devotion. The clock now read 2:30 a.m., but time was meaningless in the face of such devastation. Ethan's mind raced, replaying every moment of the past 8 months. The night Sophia had come home late, claiming a client dinner. The weekend she'd spent with friends in London. The brunches with Julian, the work trips with Victor, the neighborly chats with Noah. It was all a lie, a meticulously crafted facade. Ethan felt like a character in a story he hadn't written, his role reduced to the oblivious fool. He set the phone down, its screen now dark, and stared at Sophia. The woman he'd loved was gone, replaced by someone he didn't recognize. Yet, a part of him clung to hope, desperate, irrational hope, that there was an explanation, a glitch in the matrix that could restore his world. He imagined her waking, seeing the phone, and breaking down in tears, begging for forgiveness. But another part of him, the part that had read those messages, knew better. Sophia wasn't the victim. Here, she was the architect of his pain. The Eiffel Tower blinked in the distance, its light a cruel reminder of the dreams he'd lost. Ethan took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. He couldn't unsee what he'd seen, couldn't unfeel the betrayal that now defined him. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Whatever happened next, confrontation, departure, or collapse, he would face it, even if it meant losing everything. The night was far from over, but his heart was already broken, shattered by a secret he could never unlearn. Chapter 3. A Love Lost in Memory. Ethan Moreau sat on the floor of the Parisian apartment, the cold hardwood pressing against his palms. The phone, now dark, lay on the coffee table like a silent accusation, its secrets exposed. The Eiffel Tower's golden glow filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but its romance was a cruel mockery of the devastation within him. Sophia Laurent, the woman he'd loved for 3 years, slept on the cream-colored sofa, her auburn hair spilling over a pillow, her face serene. To Ethan, she was no longer the love of his life but a stranger who'd orchestrated a betrayal so intricate it left him breathless. The clock on the mantel read 2:35 a.m., but time had lost its meaning. Ethan's green eyes, usually bright with ambition, were clouded with tears he refused to let fall. The messages he'd found on Sophia's phone, conversations with Lucas, Victor, Noah, and Julian, had torn through his heart like shrapnel. 8 months of lies, of secret rendezvous, of laughter at his expense. He'd been saving for a ring, dreaming of a proposal under Parisian stars, while she lived a double life with 4 other men. The weight of it crushed him, each memory of their love now tainted by doubt. Ethan's gaze drifted to a Polaroid taped to the fridge, him and Sophia in Florence, Italy, 2 years ago, their smiles radiant against the backdrop of the Arno River. That trip had been the pinnacle of their love, a moment when he'd believed they were invincible. Now, as he sat in the wreckage of their present, his mind fled to that memory, seeking refuge in a past that felt pure. But even as he clung to it, a voice whispered, was it ever real? The question gnawed at him, pulling him into a spiral of recollection, where love and pain intertwined like ivy on a crumbling wall. He closed his eyes, and the apartment faded. The sounds of Paris, distant car horns, the hum of the city, dissolved, replaced by the soft lapping of the Arno and the chatter of Florentine streets. Ethan let himself fall into the memory, desperate to understand how the woman he'd loved could have become the architect of his destruction. Florence, with its golden light and timeless beauty, had been their Eden. But now, he wondered if it, too, was a lie. 2 years ago, Florence had been a dreamscape, its cobblestone streets and Renaissance architecture a canvas for Ethan and Sophia's love. They'd arrived in the city on a whim, a spontaneous trip to escape the pressures of Ethan's architectural apprenticeship and Sophia's demanding marketing job. It was early summer, the air warm and fragrant with jasmine, the city alive with tourists and street musicians. Ethan, then 27, had felt invincible, his heart full of Sophia, his future a blank page waiting to be written. Their first evening in Florence was etched in Ethan's memory like a painting. They'd wandered to the Ponte Vecchio, the ancient bridge glowing under the setting sun. Sophia, her auburn hair catching the golden light, had worn a white sundress that fluttered in the breeze. Her laughter was a melody, her hazel eyes sparkling with mischief as she pulled Ethan into a dance to a busker's violin. Passers-by had clapped, charmed by their joy, and Ethan had felt like the luckiest man alive. "This is forever, isn't it?" she'd whispered, her lips brushing his ear. He'd nodded, too overwhelmed to speak, believing her with every fiber of his being. They'd lingered on the bridge, sharing a gelato, pistachio for her, stracciatella for him, watching the Arno River reflect the dying light. Sophia had leaned against the stone railing, her fingers laced with his, and talked about their dreams. She wanted to open her own marketing firm. He wanted to design buildings that would stand for centuries. "We'll do it together," she'd said, her voice fierce with conviction. "You and me, Ethan. We'll conquer the world." He'd kissed her then, the taste of gelato and promises on his lips, and believed they could. Now, in the Parisian apartment, Ethan opened his eyes, the memory a dagger in his chest. That moment on the Ponte Vecchio had been his anchor, the foundation of his love for Sophia. But had it been real for her? Had she meant those words, or were they just lines in a script she'd perfected? The messages on her phone, flirtations with Lucas, plans with Victor, trysts with Noah and Julian, suggested a woman who thrived on deception. Ethan's hands clenched, the Polaroid crumpling slightly in his grip. He wanted to believe in the Sophia of Florence, but the Sophia of Paris was a stranger. The memory shifted, pulling Ethan deeper into that Florentine summer. After the Ponte Vecchio, they'd wandered to the Piazzale Michelangelo, a hilltop square overlooking the city. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the sky, Florence's skyline a tapestry of domes and spires. They'd sat on a stone bench, a bottle of Chianti between them, passing it back and forth as they talked. The air was cool, the city's hum a distant lullaby, and Ethan had felt a peace he'd never known before. Sophia had been radiant that night, her stories animated, her laughter infectious. She'd spoken of her childhood in Lyon, her dreams of traveling the world, her fear of being ordinary. Ethan had listened, captivated, hanging on her every word. "You're anything but ordinary," he'd told her, his voice thick with emotion. She'd smiled, a slow, knowing smile, and leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. "And you, Ethan Moreau, are my safe place," she'd said. "No matter where I go, I'll always come back to you." They'd made a pact that night, under the Florentine stars. Ethan had taken her hand, his heart pounding, and promised to love her through every storm. "I want a life with you, Sophia," he'd said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability. "A home, a family, all of it." She'd looked at him, her eyes shimmering with tears, and nodded. "I want that too," she'd whispered. "Forever, Ethan." They'd sealed the oath with a kiss, the city below bearing witness, and Ethan had believed it was unbreakable. Back in the Parisian apartment, Ethan's breath caught, the memory a cruel juxtaposition to the present. That oath had been his compass, guiding him through the challenges of their long-distance months, the stress of his career, the sacrifices he'd made for their future. But now, it felt like a lie. Had Sophia been playing a role, even then? Had her tears been genuine, or a performance to keep him tethered? The messages on her phone suggested a woman who craved excitement, who saw Ethan as predictable. The thought made his stomach churn, the Florence of his memory now a house of mirrors, each reflection distorted. The memory of Florence continued to unfold, each moment a fresh wound. Ethan recalled their days exploring the city, mornings in the Uffizi Gallery, where Sophia had marveled. At Botticelli's Birth of Venus, afternoons in the Boboli Gardens, where they'd lain on the grass, her head on his chest, dreaming aloud. They'd laughed over espresso in tiny cafes, gotten lost in the narrow streets of Oltrarno, and made love in their rented apartment, the windows open to the Tuscan breeze. Every moment had felt sacred, a building block in their shared future. But now, Ethan saw those moments through a new lens. Had Sophia been fully present, or was she already planning her escape? He remembered small details that hadn't registered. At the time, her phone buzzing during dinner, her quick glances at the screen, her vague answers when he asked who it was. "Just work," she'd said, her smile disarming. He trusted her, never suspecting that work might mean Victor, her boss, or that friends might include Lucas, Noah, or Julian. The realization was a slow poison, tainting every memory. One particular night stood out, a dinner at a trattoria near the Duomo, where Sophia had been unusually quiet. Ethan had asked if something was wrong, and she'd shaken her head, her eyes distant. "I'm just tired," she'd said, squeezing his hand. Later, as they walked back to their apartment, she'd stopped under a street lamp, pulled him close, and kissed him fiercely. "I love you, Ethan," she'd said, her voice almost desperate. He'd thought it was passion, a reaffirmation of their bond. Now, he wondered if it was guilt, a fleeting attempt to hold on to the man she was already betraying. In the Parisian apartment, Ethan's hands trembled, the Polaroid now creased from his grip. The Sophia of Florence had seemed so real, so vibrant, so his. But the Sophia of Paris, with her secret life and mocking messages, was a different creature. He wanted to scream, to shake her awake and demand answers. Was Florence a lie? Was their love ever true? Or was he just a pawn in her game? The questions were a storm, and Ethan was drowning in their fury. Ethan's mind churned, the memories of Florence now a battlefield where love fought against betrayal. He thought of their last day in the city, when they'd climbed the steps to the San Miniato al Monte, a church overlooking Florence. The view had been breathtaking, the city a patchwork of terracotta roofs and green hills. Sophia had stood at the edge of the terrace, her sundress billowing, and turned to him with a smile that stopped his heart. "This is what I want," she'd said, gesturing to the city, to him, to their future. "All of this, with you." They'd sat in the church's courtyard, listening to the monks' Gregorian chants, their voices echoing like a prayer. Ethan had felt a profound connection, not just to Sophia but to something larger, a sense that their love was eternal, blessed by the beauty around them. He'd taken her hand, his architect's mind already designing their life, a home in Paris, children with her hazel eyes, a legacy of love and creation. She'd squeezed his hand, her eyes bright, and he believed she saw the same future. But now, in the cold light of the Parisian apartment, that memory felt like a cruel illusion. The Sophia who'd stood on that terrace, who'd promised him forever, was the same Sophia who'd laughed with Lucas, flirted with Victor, met Noah in secret, and mocked Ethan with Julian. The dissonance was unbearable, a fracture in his soul. He looked at her sleeping form, her beauty now a mask, and felt a surge of anger laced with despair. How could she have done this? How could she have taken their sacred moments and turned them into a farce? Ethan stood, pacing the apartment, his footsteps heavy. The Polaroid fell to the floor, its image of Florence a relic of a love he no longer understood. He wanted to believe in the past, to hold on to the Sophia who'd danced with him on the Ponte Vecchio, who'd sworn her love under the stars. But the present was undeniable, a truth carved in the messages he'd read. The life he'd built with her was a house of cards, and Florence was just the first card to fall. As he stood by the window, the Eiffel Tower's light pulsing in the darkness, Ethan knew there was no going back. The past was gone, and the future was a void, leaving him alone with a pain that threatened to consume him. Chapter 4. The Storm of Truth. The Parisian apartment was a tomb of silence, broken only by the soft ticking of the mantel clock and the distant rumble of thunder. Ethan Moreau stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection a ghostly figure against the rain-streaked glass. The Eiffel Tower, usually a beacon of romance, flickered dimly through the storm, its golden glow dulled by the deluge. At 2:45 a.m., the city was asleep, but Ethan's world was wide awake, shattered by the secrets he'd uncovered on Sophia Laurent's phone. Sophia, the woman he'd loved for 3 years, lay on the cream-colored sofa, her auburn hair fanned out, her face serene in sleep. To Ethan, she was no longer his soulmate but a stranger who'd orchestrated a betrayal of unimaginable scope. The messages he'd found, conversations with Lucas, Victor, Noah, and Julian, had revealed a double life spanning 8 months, a conspiracy of infidelity that mocked his devotion. Ethan's green eyes, once bright with dreams, were now stormy with pain, his hands trembling as he clutched a crumpled Polaroid of their time in Florence. The memory of their love, once a sanctuary, was now a wound that bled with every heartbeat. Rain lashed the windows, each drop a drumbeat of his rising anger. Ethan had crossed a line by invading her phone, but the truth he'd found justified the sin. Lucas, his best friend, had laughed at his trust. Victor, her boss, had wielded his power to claim her. Noah, their neighbor, had betrayed their friendship. And Julian, her gay friend, had mocked Ethan's love with cruel precision. The betrayal was a symphony, and Ethan was the fool who'd believed in the melody. Now, he faced a choice: confront Sophia and risk losing everything, or swallow the pain and pretend he hadn't seen. He turned from the window, his gaze settling on Sophia. Her beauty, once his anchor, now felt like a trap. The apartment, filled with their shared dreams, his architectural sketches, her Polaroids, a photo of them in Santorini, was a stage for a tragedy he hadn't rehearsed. Thunder rolled, shaking the walls, and Ethan felt a surge of resolve. He couldn't live with the not knowing, couldn't let her sleep while his heart burned. He would wake her, he would demand answers, and whatever came next, he would face it, even if it meant tearing their world apart. Ethan crossed the room, his footsteps heavy on the polished hardwood. The air was thick with the scent of rain and the weight of unspoken truths. He stood over Sophia, his heart pounding, each beat a countdown to the moment that would change everything. Her phone lay on the coffee table, its dark screen a silent witness to the secrets it held. Ethan's hands clenched, the urge to smash the device warring with his need for answers. He took a deep breath, steeling himself, and gently shook her shoulder. "Sophia," he said, his voice low but firm, laced with a tremor he couldn't hide. Her eyelids fluttered, and for a moment, she looked like the woman he'd loved, the one who'd danced with him on the Ponte Vecchio, who'd promised forever under Florentine stars. But as her hazel eyes opened, clouded with sleep, Ethan saw only the stranger who'd betrayed him. She blinked, sitting up slowly, her brow furrowing as she registered his expression. "Ethan, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with something, guilt, perhaps, or calculation. He held up her phone, his hands steady despite the storm within. "I know," he said, the words cutting through the silence like a blade. Sophia's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face before she masked it with confusion. "Know what?" she asked, her tone too casual, too practiced. Ethan's anger flared, hot and consuming. "Don't," he snapped, his voice rising. "Don't play innocent. I saw the messages. Lucas, Victor, Noah, Julian, all of them." The names hung in the air, each one a wound, and Sophia's face paled, her mask slipping for a moment. Thunder crashed outside, rattling the windows, and the room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in. Sophia's gaze darted to the phone, then back to Ethan, her lips parting as if to speak. But no words came, only a heavy silence that confirmed his worst fears. Ethan's chest heaved, his voice breaking as he continued. 8 months, Sophia. 8 months of lies while I was saving for a ring, planning our future. How could you? The question was a plea, a desperate hope that she'd offer an explanation to salvage their love. But deep down, he knew the truth was already out, and it was uglier than he'd ever imagined. Sophia's silence stretched, a chasm between them, until a slow, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips. It wasn't the warm smile Ethan had loved, but something cold, mocking, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. She leaned back on the sofa, crossing her arms, her posture defiant. "Took you long enough to figure it out," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow, his breath catching as he stared at her, searching for the woman he'd known. But she was gone, replaced by this stranger who reveled in his pain. "You're not even going to deny it?" Ethan asked, his voice hoarse, disbelief warring with rage. Sophia laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that echoed in the apartment. "Why bother? You've seen it all, haven't you? Lucas, Victor, Noah, Julian. They were entertainment." She shrugged, as if discussing a hobby, not a betrayal that had shattered his world. "You were so predictable, Ethan. Always working, always planning. I got bored. I needed something more. Her words were a knife, each one twisting deeper, and Ethan's vision blurred with tears he refused to shed. He stumbled back, his hand gripping the edge of the coffee table for support. Bored, he repeated, the word tasting like ash. I was building a life for us, Sophia. I trusted you. I loved you. His voice cracked, raw with the pain of 3 years poured into a love she'd discarded. Sophia's smile faded, but not with remorse. Her eyes glinted with something darker, a mix of amusement and pity. Love, she said, almost spitting the word. Love is a cage, Ethan. I wanted to feel alive, and they gave me that. You were just too safe. Thunder roared, shaking the apartment, and Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. The Sophia he'd known, the one who'd whispered promises in Florence, who'd laughed with him in Santorini, was a fiction, a role she'd played to keep him tethered. The realization was a tidal wave, drowning the last vestiges of hope. He wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her feel the agony she'd inflicted. But her indifference was a wall, impenetrable and cold, and Ethan knew no words could breach it. Ethan's anger surged, a wildfire consuming the last of his restraint. He grabbed a crystal wine glass from the coffee table, the one they'd used to toast their anniversary, and hurled it against the wall. It shattered with a deafening crash, shards scattering across the hardwood like fragments of his heart. Sophia flinched, her composure slipping for a moment, but she quickly regained it, her eyes narrowing. Really, Ethan, she said, her voice laced with mockery. A tantrum? That's not like you. Not like me, he roared, his voice echoing in the apartment. You don't know me, Sophia. You never did. You were too busy with your entertainment to care. He paced the room, his hands raking through his dark hair, his chest heaving with the effort to contain his rage. The rain outside pounded harder, a relentless assault that matched the storm within. He stopped, turning to face her, his eyes blazing. Lucas was my best friend. Noah was our neighbor. Julian was your friend. And Victor? Your boss? How could you do this? How could you laugh at me while I was planning our future? Sophia stood, her movements graceful but deliberate, like a predator sizing up its prey. She stepped closer, her hazel eyes locked on his, unyielding. You want the truth, Ethan? You were a means to an end. Stable, reliable, the perfect boyfriend. But I'm not built for that. I wanted more. Excitement, danger, freedom. They gave me that. You gave me monotony. Her words were a lash, each one stripping away another layer of his dignity. Ethan's hands clenched, his nails digging into his palms, the pain a tether to reality. He wanted to fight back, to hurt her as she'd hurt him, but the weight of her indifference was paralyzing. She wasn't crying, wasn't begging for forgiveness. She was proud, defiant, as if his pain was her victory. Thunder crashed again, the room trembling, and Ethan felt the last thread of their love snap. Get out, he said, his voice low, dangerous. Take your lies and your entertainment, and get out of my life. Sophia's smile returned, sharp and cutting. Gladly, she said, grabbing her coat from the armrest. I need to clear my head anyway. She walked to the door, pausing to glance back. You'll survive, Ethan. You always do. And with that, she was gone, the door slamming behind her. The apartment was silent again, save for the relentless rain and the occasional crack of thunder. Ethan stood frozen, the echo of the slamming door reverberating in his chest. Sophia was gone, her parting words, "You'll survive," a taunt that lingered like smoke. He sank onto the sofa, his body heavy, his mind a whirl of pain and disbelief. The shards of the wine glass glinted on the floor, a mirror to his shattered heart. The Eiffel Tower's light pulsed through the rain, a cruel reminder of the dreams he'd lost. He buried his face in his hands, the weight of the confrontation crashing over him. He'd expected tears, apologies, even lies, anything but the cold, calculated cruelty. Sophia had shown, her laughter, her disdain, her admission that he was monotony, replayed in his mind, each word a fresh wound. He thought of the messages, the plans she'd made with 4 other men, the way they'd mocked him. Lucas, his brother in all but blood. Victor, the predator in a suit. Noah, the neighbor he'd trusted. Julian, the friend who'd never been a friend. The betrayal was a hydra, each head a new agony. Ethan's gaze fell on the Polaroid, now crumpled on the coffee table. Florence, Santorini, Paris, All lies, all part of a performance Sophia had mastered. He wanted to hate her, to erase her from his heart, but love was a stubborn ghost, clinging to him even now. He imagined her out in the rain, meeting one of her lovers, laughing at his pain. The thought was a knife, twisting deeper, and Ethan let out a choked sob, the first tear finally falling. The storm outside raged on, but it was nothing compared to the tempest within. He stood, his legs unsteady, and walked to the window. The rain blurred the city, Paris reduced to a smear of lights and shadows. Ethan pressed his forehead against the cold glass, his breath fogging the surface. He was alone, the life he'd built with Sophia reduced to rubble. The confrontation had given him no closure, only more questions, more pain. Where did he go from here? How did he rebuild when the foundation of his world was gone? The Eiffel Tower blinked in the distance, a silent witness to his unraveling, and Ethan knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 5: The Betrayal of Brotherhood. Ethan Moreau's world had crumbled in the span of a single night, and the days that followed were a blur of pain and dislocation. After the devastating confrontation with Sophia in their Parisian apartment, where her cold laughter and admission of infidelity had shattered his heart, Ethan had fled the city that once held his dreams. Paris, with its romantic glow and the mocking silhouette of the Eiffel Tower, was now a graveyard of memories. He needed distance, a place to breathe, to process the betrayal that had upended his life. Amsterdam, with its labyrinthine canals and anonymous crowds, seemed as good a refuge as any. The train from Paris to Amsterdam had been a 4-hour journey through a landscape Ethan barely registered. Rain streaked the windows, mirroring the storm still raging within him. His green eyes, once bright with ambition, were dulled by sleepless nights, his dark hair disheveled from running his hands through it in frustration. The messages he'd found on Sophia's phone, conversations with Lucas, Victor, Noah, and Julian, replayed in his mind like a relentless film reel. 8 months of lies, of secret rendezvous, of laughter at his expense. He'd been saving for a ring, planning a proposal, while Sophia and her lovers had mocked his devotion. Lucas, his best friend since high school, was the deepest wound. They'd grown up together in Boston, shared secrets, stood by each other through heartbreak and triumph. Lucas had been the one to toast Ethan's move to Paris, to cheer his love for Sophia. Yet, the messages revealed a different man, one who'd pursued Sophia behind Ethan's back, joking about his clueless friend. The betrayal was a knife, twisting with every memory of their friendship. When Lucas texted 2 days after Ethan's discovery, asking to meet in Amsterdam to explain, Ethan's first instinct was to ignore him. But the need for answers, for closure, was a fire he couldn't extinguish. Now, as Ethan stepped off the train into Amsterdam's bustling Centraal station, the city's charm felt hollow. The canals glittered under a gray sky, bicycles whizzed past, and tourists laughed in the distance, but Ethan was a ghost among them, haunted by betrayal. He checked into a small hotel in the Jordan district, a bohemian enclave of narrow streets and cozy bars. The meeting with Lucas was set for tonight, in a bar called De Vergud Kroon, the Golden Crown. Ethan didn't know what he hoped to gain, but he knew he couldn't move forward without facing the man who'd once been his brother. The De Vergud Kroon was a relic of old Amsterdam, its wooden beams and stained glass windows glowing warmly against the evening chill. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of beer and candle wax, the hum of conversation mingling with the clink of glasses. Ethan sat at a corner table, a glass of Heineken untouched before him, his eyes fixed on the door. The bar was crowded, a mix of locals and expats, their laughter a stark contrast to the storm in his heart. His hands fidgeted, tracing the grain of the wooden table, each second stretching into eternity as he waited for Lucas. Lucas had chosen this place, texting that it was neutral ground, as if their friendship were a war zone requiring diplomacy. The thought made Ethan's jaw tighten, his anger simmering beneath a fragile calm. He'd spent the day replaying their history, summers in Boston, late-night talks about dreams, Lucas's infectious grin at Ethan's graduation. They'd been inseparable, 2 kids against the world. But now, Lucas was a stranger, his betrayal a poison that tainted every memory. The messages Ethan had read, flirtations, plans for a hotel in Montmartre, Lucas joking about Ethan's trust, were seared into his mind, each word a fresh cut. The door swung open, and Ethan's heart lurched. Lucas stepped inside, shaking rain from his blonde hair, his blue eyes scanning the room. He was the same Lucas, tall, charismatic, with a smile that could charm anyone, but to Ethan, he was a traitor. Lucas spotted him and approached, his expression a mix of caution and bravado. "Ethan," he said, sliding into the chair opposite. "Thanks for coming." His voice was casual, as if they were meeting for a beer, not to dissect a betrayal. Ethan's hands clenched under the table, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't thank me, Lucas. Just talk." Lucas leaned back, his smile faltering but not disappearing. "Look, man, I know you're pissed. I get it, but let's not make this bigger than it is." The words were a spark to Ethan's fury, and he leaned forward, his eyes blazing. "Bigger than it is? You slept with Sophia, you laughed about me behind my back. You were my brother, Lucas. How could you?" The bar's noise faded, the world narrowing to the space between them, charged with years of trust now broken. Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair, his casual demeanor a slap in the face. "It wasn't personal, Ethan," he said, his tone almost apologetic but laced with dismissal. "These things happen. Sophia came onto me, and I don't know, it just happened." Ethan's vision blurred with rage, his hands gripping the table to keep from lunging across it. "Just happened," he repeated, his voice a low growl. "You planned it, Lucas. I saw the messages. You met her in Montmartre, laughed about how clueless I was. That's not an accident, that's betrayal." Lucas's smile faded, but his eyes remained defiant. "Okay, fine, I screwed up, but you're acting like I planned to hurt you. Sophia was the one calling the shots. She wanted excitement, and I was there. So were the others." He shrugged, as if the mention of Victor, Noah, and Julian were inconsequential. Ethan's heart pounded, each word a fresh wound. The others. The reminder that Sophia's infidelity was a conspiracy, with Lucas as a willing participant, was a fire in his veins. "You were my best friend," Ethan said, his voice breaking. 15 years, Lucas, and you threw it away for her." The bar's warmth felt suffocating, the chatter of other patrons a cruel backdrop to Ethan's unraveling. Lucas leaned forward, his voice lowering. "You're making this about me, but Sophia's the one who played you. She's the one who got bored, who needed more than you could give. I was just along for the ride." The words were a punch, echoing Sophia's own cruel admission. "You were predictable, Ethan." "I got bored." Ethan's hands shook, his anger mingling with a deeper pain, the realization that the two people he trusted most had seen him as a fool. He thought of the nights Lucas had crashed at their Paris apartment, sharing beers and stories, all while plotting with Sophia. The memories were tainted now, each one a lie. Ethan's voice was barely a whisper, thick with emotion. "You could have said no, Lucas. You could have told me, but you chose to stab me in the back." Lucas's expression softened, but only slightly, a flicker of guilt overshadowed by self-justification. "I'm sorry you got hurt," he said, "but that's life, man. People mess up." The apology was hollow, a bandage on a gaping wound, and Ethan felt his control slip. Ethan's anger erupted, a volcano that had been simmering since Paris. He stood, his chair scraping against the floor, drawing glances from nearby patrons. "People mess up," he shouted, his voice cutting through the bar's hum. "You didn't mess up, Lucas. You betrayed me. You laughed at me while I was planning a life with her. You're not sorry, you're just sorry I found out." His hands clenched into fists, his body trembling with the urge to lash out. The bar seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with the weight of his fury. Lucas stood too, his height matching Ethan's, his face hardening. "You need to calm down, man," he said, his voice low but firm. "You're making a scene. This isn't worth throwing away our friendship." The word friendship was a spark to Ethan's rage, and he laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Friendship? You killed that the moment you touched her. You're nothing to me now." The words were a release, a severing of a bond that had defined his life, and Ethan felt a strange mix of freedom and loss. Lucas's eyes narrowed, his patience wearing thin. "You want to hate me? Fine, but don't act like you're perfect. Sophia wasn't happy, and you didn't see it. Maybe if you'd paid attention, she wouldn't have looked elsewhere." The accusation was a dagger, twisting in Ethan's heart. He thought of Sophia's words in Paris, "You were too predictable," and the pain was unbearable. a confirmation of his deepest fears. Without thinking, Ethan's fist shot out, connecting with Lucas's jaw in a sickening crack. Lucas stumbled back, crashing into a table, glasses shattering as patrons gasped. The bar erupted into chaos, voices shouting, the bartender yelling for them to stop. Ethan stood frozen, his hand throbbing, his chest heaving. Lucas wiped blood from his lip, his eyes blazing with shock and anger. "You're pathetic," he spat, straightening up. "Go ahead, hit me again. It won't change what happened." Ethan's vision blurred, tears mixing with rage, and he turned away, pushing through the crowd toward the door. The rain outside beckoned, a cold embrace for his burning heart, and he knew he couldn't stay. Not in this bar, not in this moment. Ethan burst out of de Vergud Kroon into the Amsterdam night, the rain soaking him instantly. The Jordaan's narrow streets were slick with water, the canals reflecting the city's lights like fractured mirrors. He walked blindly, his breath ragged, his hand throbbing from the punch. The cold rain was a shock, a temporary reprieve from the fire in his chest, but it couldn't wash away the pain. Lucas's words echoed in his mind. Sophia wasn't happy, and you didn't see it, mingling with Sophia's own cruel taunts. The betrayal was a hydra, each had a new agony, and Ethan was drowning in its venom. He stopped by a canal, leaning against a stone bridge, the rain streaming down his face. Amsterdam's beauty was lost on him, its charm a cruel contrast to his despair. He thought of the life he'd left in Paris, the apartment filled with sketches and Polaroids, now a mausoleum of his love for Sophia. Lucas had been his anchor, the friend who'd seen him through every storm, but now he was an enemy, his betrayal a wound that would never heal. Ethan's sob broke free, lost in the rain, a raw sound of grief and rage. He wondered what came next. The confrontation with Lucas had given him no closure, only more questions, more pain. Could he ever trust again, knowing his best friend had laughed at his devotion? Could he rebuild a life when the foundation, love, friendship, trust, was gone? The rain fell harder, the canal's surface rippling, and Ethan felt a shift within him. The boy who'd believed in fairy tales was dead, replaced by a man forged in betrayal's fire. He would survive, not because Lucas or Sophia thought he would, but because he had to. The night stretched before him, cold and endless, but Ethan took a step forward, into the rain, into the unknown. Chapter 6. The Puppet Strings of Power. Ethan Moreau's heart was a battlefield, scarred from the betrayals that had unraveled his life in Paris. The confrontation with Sophia, her cold laughter echoing in their rain-soaked apartment, had been a wound that refused to heal. Her admission of infidelity with 4 men, Lucas, Victor, Noah, and Julian, had shattered his trust, but the encounter with Lucas in Amsterdam had deepened his rage, turning it into a smoldering hatred. Yet, amidst the chaos of his emotions, one question gnawed at him. How had Sophia, the woman he'd loved so fiercely, become a stranger capable of such deceit? Seeking answers, Ethan found himself on a train to London, chasing the shadow of Victor, Sophia's boss, whose messages had hinted at a darker dynamic. The Eurostar from Amsterdam to London cut through the grey morning, its rhythmic hum a counterpoint to Ethan's turbulent thoughts. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the fields of northern France into a watercolor of despair. Ethan, now 29, sat alone, his green eyes hollow, his dark hair unkempt from restless nights. The messages he'd read on Sophia's phone replayed in his mind. Lucas's mocking laughter, Julian's cruel taunts, Noah's casual betrayal, and Victor's commanding tone, laced with an authority that chilled Ethan. Victor, the polished marketing executive, had been more than a lover. He'd wielded power over Sophia, his words suggesting a relationship built on control. Ethan's purpose in London was unclear, even to himself. He wasn't seeking revenge, not yet, but understanding. Victor's messages had stood out, not just for their explicitness but for their undertone of coercion. Meet me at the Savoy, or we'll need to discuss your performance review. Sophia's replies had been playful, but Ethan sensed a current of fear beneath her bravado. Was she a willing participant, or had Victor manipulated her into this web? The question was a splinter in Ethan's mind, driving him to Canary Wharf, where Victor's firm, Apex Marketing Solutions, occupied a glass tower that gleamed like a blade against the London skyline. As the train pulled into St. Pancras Station, Ethan felt a mix of dread and determination. London was a city of ambition, its pulse relentless, but for Ethan, it was a labyrinth where he hoped to find a piece of the truth. He stepped onto the platform, the bustle of commuters a stark contrast to his solitude. His destination was Victor's office, a place he'd never visited but felt compelled to confront. The rain followed him, a constant companion, as he hailed a cab and set out to unravel the next layer of Sophia's betrayal. Canary Wharf was a forest of glass and steel, its skyscrapers towering over the Thames like sentinels of corporate power. Apex Marketing Solutions occupied the 32nd floor of One Canada Square, a sleek monolith that gleamed even under London's grey sky. Ethan stepped out of the elevator into a reception area that screamed wealth, marble floors, abstract art, and a panoramic view of the city shrouded in mist. The receptionist, a young woman with a polished smile, greeted him warmly, but Ethan's mind was elsewhere, his heart pounding as he prepared to face Victor. He'd called ahead, claiming to be a potential client interested in Apex's services, a lie that felt sour on his tongue but necessary to gain access. Victor, unaware of Ethan's true identity, had agreed to a brief meeting. Ethan's plan was vague. He wanted to see Victor, to look into the eyes of the man who'd helped destroy his life, to gauge whether Sophia had been a pawn or a player in their affair. His architect's mind, trained to see patterns, sought the structure beneath the chaos, the truth hidden in the details. The receptionist led him to a glass-walled conference room, where Victor waited. Victor Langston was in his mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, his silver-flecked hair and sharp blue eyes exuding confidence. He rose, extending a hand, his smile as practiced as a politician's. "Mr. Moreau, a pleasure," he said, his British accent smooth and authoritative. Ethan shook his hand, his grip firm despite the turmoil within, and sat across from Victor, the Thames visible through the window, its surface rippling under the rain. Victor launched into a polished pitch about Apex's marketing strategies, but Ethan barely listened, his eyes studying the man before him. This was the Victor who'd sent Sophia suggestive messages, who'd demanded meetings in London hotels, who'd called Ethan predictable. The memory of those messages fueled Ethan's anger, but he kept his expression neutral, searching for a crack in Victor's facade. "I'm actually here about something personal," Ethan interrupted, his voice steady but laced with an edge. Victor's smile faltered, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "Personal?" he asked, leaning back. "Do elaborate." Ethan took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly under the table. The moment had come, and there was no turning back. "I'm not a client," he said, his voice low but firm. "I'm Ethan Moreau, Sophia Laurent's boyfriend. Or, I was, until I found your messages on her phone." The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation, and Victor's expression shifted, his smile vanishing, replaced by a guarded wariness. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the distant hum of the city below and the soft patter of rain against the windows. Victor leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, assessing Ethan like a chess opponent. "I see," he said, his tone measured, betraying nothing. "And what exactly do you want, Mr. Moreau? An apology? A confession?" His voice was smooth, but Ethan caught a flicker of unease, a crack in the polished veneer. "I want the truth," Ethan said, his voice rising, laced with the pain of betrayal. "You were sleeping with Sophia. You sent her messages, planned meetings, threatened her job. I want to know why, and what she was to you." Victor's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile that chilled Ethan. "Sophia," he said, almost fondly, "is a remarkable woman. Ambitious, clever, willing to do what it takes to succeed. Our arrangement was mutually beneficial." The word arrangement was a knife, and Ethan's hands clenched, his nails digging into his palms. "Mutually beneficial?" he repeated, his voice trembling with rage. "You coerced her, Victor. I saw the messages. You threatened her career if she didn't comply." To Ethan's surprise, Victor didn't deny it. Instead, he leaned back, his expression almost amused. "Coercion is a strong word," he said. "Sophia knew the game. She wanted to climb the ladder, and I offered opportunities, trips to London, high-profile projects, a chance to shine. In return, she offered companionship. It's how the world works, Ethan. Power, ambition, desire, they're all currency." His words were a revelation, painting Sophia not as a victim but as a willing participant, trading her loyalty for advancement. Yet, Ethan's mind flashed to her messages, the playful tone masking a threat of fear, and he wondered if Victor's version was the whole truth. Ethan's heart pounded, his mind racing to reconcile Victor's words with the Sophia he'd known. The woman who'd danced with him in Florence, who'd promised forever under the stars, had been ambitious, yes, but capable of this? He thought of her laughter, her dreams of starting her own firm, her fierce independence. Had those been lies, or had Victor exploited her ambition, twisting it into something sordid? She wasn't just your companion, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. She was my life, and you used her, manipulated her, while I was building a future for us. Victor's smile faded, replaced by a flicker of irritation. You're naive, Ethan, he said, his tone sharp. Sophia wasn't some innocent damsel. She pursued me, flirted, made it clear she was willing to play the game. But yes, I set boundaries. If she wanted to keep her position, she needed to meet certain expectations. She chose to meet them. He paused, his eyes glinting with something darker. And she enjoyed it. The thrill, the power, the secrecy. She wasn't a victim, she was a partner. The words were a sledgehammer, shattering the fragile hope Ethan had clung to. He'd wanted to believe Sophia had been coerced, that her betrayal was born of pressure, not choice. But Victor's account painted her as complicit, reveling in the affair, just as her messages with Lucas and Julian had suggested. Yet, Ethan's architect's mind, trained to see patterns, caught a discrepancy. Victor's tone was too smug, his story too neat, as if he were deflecting blame. Ethan leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. If she was so willing, why the threats? Why tell her to meet you or lose her job? Victor's composure slipped, a flash of anger crossing his face before he masked it. Business is ruthless, he said, his voice cold. Sophia understood that. She made her choices, just as you made yours by staying blind to her nature. The accusation stung, echoing Lucas's words in Amsterdam. Sophia wasn't happy, and you didn't see it. Ethan's hands trembled, his anger mingling with a growing realization. Sophia was neither wholly villain nor victim, but a woman caught in a web of her own ambition and Victor's manipulation. The truth was a mosaic, each piece sharp enough to cut. Ethan stood, his chair scraping against the marble floor, the sound sharp in the sterile conference room. The confrontation had given him no closure, only a deeper wound. Victor's revelations had painted a picture of Sophia as both predator and prey, a woman who'd chased ambition into a trap of her own making. Ethan's heart ached for the Sophia he'd loved, the one who'd dreamed with him in Florence, but that woman was gone, replaced by someone he could neither forgive nor fully condemn. You're a monster, he said, his voice low, trembling with rage. You used your power to control her, to break us. I hope it was worth it. Victor rose, his smile returning, colder than ever. Power is the only currency that matters, Ethan, he said. Sophia understood that, even if you don't. Go back to your blueprints and your dreams. Leave the real world to those who can handle it. The dismissal was a final blow, and Ethan's hands clenched, the urge to strike. Victor overwhelming, but he knew violence wouldn't erase the truth, wouldn't rebuild what was lost. He turned, walking toward the door, the weight of Victor's words heavy on his shoulders. As he stepped into the elevator, the glass walls reflecting his haggard face, Ethan felt a shift within him. The journey to London had clarified one thing. Sophia's betrayal was not just a personal failing but a consequence of a world where power corrupted, where ambition could twist love into something unrecognizable. He thought of her messages, her laughter with Lucas, her defiance in Paris, and saw her now as a tragic figure, caught between her desires and Victor's control. The realization didn't lessen his pain, but it gave it context, a framework for the chaos. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle, London's skyline a blur of lights and shadows. Ethan walked toward the Thames, the river's surface rippling under the fading storm. He was alone, the life he'd built with Sophia reduced to ashes, but he was beginning to see a path forward, not to forgiveness, but to survival. The truth about Victor had added a new layer to his grief, a reminder that betrayal was never simple, never clean. As he stood by the water, the city's pulse steady around him, Ethan vowed to keep searching for answers, even if they led to more pain. The story wasn't over, and neither was he. Chapter 7: The Cost of Recklessness. Ethan Moreau's journey through betrayal had left him a shadow of the man he'd been. The revelations in Paris, Amsterdam, and London had stripped away his illusions, exposing a world where love was a currency and trust a liability. Sophia's infidelity with 4 men had shattered his heart, each name, Lucas, Victor, Noah, and Julian, a fresh wound that refused to heal. His confrontations with Sophia, Lucas, and Victor had offered no closure, only deeper questions about the woman he'd loved and the men who'd betrayed him. Now, in the aftermath of those shattering encounters, Ethan found himself adrift, haunted by the fragments of a life he could no longer reclaim. He had returned to Paris briefly, unable to stay away from the city that held his past, even as it tormented him. The apartment he'd shared with Sophia was a mausoleum, its walls echoing with memories of love and lies. Ethan's days were spent in a haze, his architect's mind, once sharp with vision, now clouded with grief. He avoided the places they'd loved, the Seine, the Louvre, the Eiffel Tower, each a reminder of a fairy tale that had ended in tragedy. Yet, the world refused to let him grieve in peace. A news alert on his phone, received late one evening, jolted him from his stupor. A fatal car accident on the outskirts of Lisbon, Portugal, involving Noah, the neighbor who'd been one of Sophia's lovers. The article was brief but chilling. Noah, driving recklessly while texting, had veered into oncoming traffic, colliding with another vehicle. The driver of the other car, a young woman, had died at the scene. Noah was injured and under arrest, facing charges of vehicular manslaughter. The report mentioned a connection to Sophia Laurent, whose name had surfaced in the investigation due to text messages found on Noah's phone. Ethan's heart lurched, the news a fresh blow in a saga that refused to end. Sophia, implicated in a tragedy, was once again at the center of his pain, her shadow inescapable. Ethan sat in the darkened apartment, the glow of his laptop casting harsh light on his haggard face. The rain outside mirrored his turmoil, a relentless downpour that had followed him from Paris to Amsterdam to London. He needed to know more, not just about the accident, but about Sophia's role, about the ripple effects of her betrayal. The thought of traveling to Lisbon, of confronting this new chapter, filled him with dread, but inaction was worse. He booked a flight, his resolve hardened by a need to understand the full cost of Sophia's actions, even if it destroyed what little remained of his heart. Lisbon welcomed Ethan with a deceptive warmth, its sun-drenched hills and colorful buildings a stark contrast to the darkness in his heart. The city buzzed with life, tourists flocking to Belém Tower, locals sipping coffee in Alfama's narrow streets, but Ethan felt like a specter, disconnected from the vibrancy around him. He checked into a modest hotel near the Tagus River, its view of the water offering no solace. The accident, and Sophia's connection to it, consumed his thoughts, a puzzle he needed to solve to make sense of the wreckage of his life. His first step was to gather information. The news reports were sparse, focusing on the tragedy and Noah's arrest, with only vague mentions of Sophia. Ethan contacted a local journalist, Ana Ribeiro, who'd written one of the articles, arranging to meet her at a cafe in Chiado. Ana, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s, greeted him with a mix of curiosity and caution. Over strong espresso, she shared what she knew. Noah, a British expat living in Paris, had been driving to meet Sophia in Lisbon when the accident occurred. Text messages on his phone, recovered by police, showed he'd been arranging a rendezvous, distracted by her replies at the moment of the crash. "The police are looking into Sophia's involvement," Anna said, her voice measured. She wasn't in the car, but her messages could make her liable as a contributing factor. "They're trying to locate her, but she's gone off the grid." Ethan's stomach twisted, the idea of Sophia entangled in a criminal case both shocking and unsurprising. Anna handed him a police report summary, obtained through a contact, which detailed the crash. Noah's car, a rented BMW, had crossed the median on a rural road near Sintra, striking a Fiat driven by Mariana Costa, a 24-year-old teacher. Mariana's death had sparked outrage, and Noah faced intense scrutiny. Ethan left the cafe with more questions than answers. Why was Noah meeting Sophia in Lisbon? Had their affair continued after Ethan's confrontation with her? And where was Sophia now, hiding from the law or simply indifferent to the chaos she'd caused? The sun beat down as he walked along the river, the weight of the tragedy pressing on him. Mariana's death was a stark reminder that betrayal had consequences beyond his own pain. a ripple effect that claimed innocent lives. Ethan felt a surge of guilt, as if his failure to see Sophia's true nature had set this chain of events in motion. Driven by a need to confront the reality of the accident, Ethan rented a car and drove to the site near Sintra, a picturesque town known for its fairy tale palaces. The road, a winding stretch flanked by eucalyptus groves and rolling hills, was deceptively serene, belying the horror that had unfolded. A makeshift memorial marked the spot: flowers, candles, and a photograph of Mariana Costa, her smiling face a gut punch to Ethan's already fragile heart. He parked and approached, his steps heavy, the scent of wildflowers mingling with the tang of burnt rubber still lingering from the crash. The police report had described the scene in clinical detail. No's BMW, speeding at 120 kilometers per hour, had veered left, smashing into Mariana's Fiat. The impact was catastrophic, crushing the smaller car and killing Mariana instantly. Noah, injured but alive, had been found clutching his phone, Sophia's messages open on the screen. Ethan knelt by the memorial, his fingers tracing Mariana's photo, a wave of sorrow crashing over him. She'd been young, full of promise, her life snuffed out because Noah couldn't resist texting Sophia. The injustice of it, the senselessness, fueled Ethan's anger, a fire that burned for both Noah and Sophia. He stood, his gaze sweeping the road, imagining the moment of impact, the screech of tires, the shattering glass, the silence that followed. The police report noted No's blood alcohol level was just below the legal limit, but his distraction was the true culprit. Sophia's messages, flirty and urgent, had been the catalyst, each word a spark that ignited disaster. Ethan's mind flashed to their Paris apartment, to No's friendly smiles, his offers of wine, all while he'd been entangled with Sophia. The betrayal, once personal, now felt universal, a force that destroyed indiscriminately. As Ethan returned to his car, a local woman, tending the memorial, approached him. She spoke in halting English, mistaking him for a mourner. Mariana was loved, she said, tears in her eyes. Her students, they cry every day. Ethan nodded, unable to speak, the woman's grief a mirror to his own. He drove back to Lisbon, the memorial's image burned into his mind, a reminder that his pain was but one thread in a tapestry of loss. Sophia's actions, whether intentional or reckless, had blood on them now, and Ethan needed to know how deeply she was entangled. Back in Lisbon, Ethan sought out more details, driven by a need to understand Sophia's role. Through honest contacts, he arranged a meeting with a police officer, Inspector Carlos Mendes, who was assisting with the investigation. They met at a nondescript station in Baixa, the officer's stern demeanor softened by a willingness to share limited information. Mendes confirmed that Sophia was a person of interest, her messages to Noah indicating she'd urged him to hurry to Lisbon for a special night. The texts, sent minutes before the crash, had distracted Noah, contributing to the accident. Ms. Laurent isn't charged yet, Mendes said, his English accented but clear. But we need to question her. She's not in Lisbon, and her Paris residence is empty. Do you know where she might be? Ethan shook his head, his throat tight. The idea of Sophia on the run, evading justice, was both infuriating and heartbreaking. He shared what he knew, her betrayal, the other men, her disappearance after their confrontation, but it offered little help. Mendes noted that No's trial was pending, and Sophia's testimony could be critical, but her absence complicated matters. The officer revealed another detail. Noah had been cooperative, admitting his distraction but blaming Sophia for pressuring him. He says she was insistent, Mendes said, choosing his words carefully. She wanted him in Lisbon urgently, said it was important. Ethan's mind raced, wondering what had driven Sophia to such desperation. Was it another game, another thrill, or something more? The uncertainty gnawed at him, a reminder that Sophia remained an enigma, her motives as elusive as her whereabouts. As Ethan left the station, the weight of the investigation pressed on him. Sophia's actions had sparked a tragedy, and her absence suggested guilt, or at least fear. He walked through Lisbon streets, the city's beauty now a cruel irony, its vibrancy mocking his despair. Mariana's death, No's arrest, Sophia's flight, all were consequences of a betrayal that had started in Paris, a chain reaction Ethan hadn't foreseen. He felt complicit, as if his love for Sophia had been the first domino to fall, and the guilt was a new burden he carried. Ethan returned to his hotel, the Tagus River glittering under the evening sun, its beauty a painful contrast to the darkness within him. He sat on the balcony, a glass of vinho verde untouched, his mind churning with the day's revelations. Mariana's death was a tragedy that transcended his personal loss, a stark reminder that betrayal had far-reaching consequences. Noah, once a friendly neighbor, was now a criminal, his life ruined by a moment of recklessness. Sophia, the woman he'd loved, was a fugitive, her actions implicated in a death that had shattered a community. And Ethan, caught in the aftermath, was left to grapple with a grief that felt infinite. He thought of Sophia's confrontation in Paris, her cold laughter, her admission that she'd been bored. Had that boredom led her to Lisbon, to Noah, to a night that ended in tragedy? The police report suggested urgency in her messages, a need to see Noah that went beyond their affair. Ethan wondered if she'd been running from something, Victor's manipulation, her own guilt, or the life she'd destroyed. The possibility that she was suffering, even now, stirred a flicker of pity, quickly extinguished by his anger. She'd made choices, and those choices had blood on them. The news of the accident had reached Paris, Anna told him in a follow-up call. Sophia's colleagues were shocked, her reputation tarnished, her absence fueling speculation. The investigation was ongoing, with pressure mounting to find her. Ethan felt a strange detachment, as if he were watching a story unfold, no longer its protagonist. Yet, he couldn't walk away. Mariana's face, her memorial, haunted him, a reminder that his pain was part of a larger tapestry of loss. He needed to see this through, to understand Sophia's final act, even if it meant facing more heartbreak. As night fell, Lisbon's lights danced on the river, a city alive with promise. Ethan stood, his resolve hardened. He would keep searching, keep questioning, until the truth was laid bare. The accident had changed everything, a turning point that demanded reckoning. Sophia's betrayal had started in Paris, but its echoes reached far beyond, claiming lives and futures. Ethan would follow those echoes, no matter the cost, because to stop would be to surrender to the void. The night stretched before him, vast and unforgiving, but he stepped into it, a man forged in tragedy, determined to find answers in the ruins. Chapter 8. The Mask of Friendship. Ethan Moreau's heart was a tapestry of scars, each thread woven from the betrayals that had unraveled his life. The revelations in Paris, Amsterdam, London, and Lisbon had stripped away his illusions, leaving him a man adrift in a sea of pain. Sophia's infidelity with 4 men, Lucas, Victor, Noah, and Julian, had shattered his trust, and the tragic accident in Lisbon, caused by Noah's reckless texting with Sophia, had added a layer of guilt and sorrow. Ethan had loved Sophia with a devotion that bordered on worship, but her cold laughter in Paris, Lucas's hollow excuses in Amsterdam, Victor's manipulative arrogance in London, and the death of an innocent woman in Lisbon had shown him a world where love was a weapon and trust a trap. After Lisbon, Ethan couldn't return to Paris. The city, once a canvas for his dreams, was now a graveyard of memories, its landmarks, the Eiffel Tower, the Seine, tainted by Sophia's lies. Seeking a reprieve, he traveled to Madrid, a city he'd never visited with her, hoping its unfamiliar streets would offer a moment of peace. Madrid was alive with color and sound, its plazas bustling with tourists, its tapas bars filled with laughter, but Ethan felt like a ghost, his green eyes dulled by grief, his dark hair unkempt from restless nights. He rented a small apartment near the Retiro Park, intending to lose himself in the city's rhythm, to find a way to breathe again. Yet, the past refused to release him. The news of Noah's arrest and Sophia's implication in the Lisbon accident followed him, a shadow he couldn't escape. He avoided his phone, fearing more updates, but his mind churned with questions. Who was Sophia, really? The woman who'd danced with him in Florence, who'd promised forever under the stars, or the one who'd orchestrated a web of deceit? The 4th man, Julian, her gay friend, remained a mystery, his messages the cruelest, mocking Ethan's devotion with a venom that stung. Ethan had never confronted Julian, and the unanswered questions about him gnawed at his soul. One sunny afternoon, seeking solace, Ethan wandered into a cafe in the Plaza Mayor, a vibrant square framed by red brick buildings and arcades. The cafe, El Sol y la Luna, was a cozy haven, its tables spilling onto the cobblestone plaza, its air fragrant with coffee and churros. Ethan sat at an outdoor table, a cup of café con leche before him, his sketchbook open but untouched. He was trying to draw, to reclaim the architect's vision that had once defined him, but his pencil hovered, his mind lost in memories of Sophia. It was then, by a twist of fate, that he saw him, Julian, stepping into the café, his familiar sharp features and easy charm unmistakable. Ethan's breath caught, his heart lurching as Julian entered El Sol y la Luna. Julian was as Ethan remembered him from Paris, tall, with jet black hair and piercing gray eyes, his movements graceful, his smile disarming. Sophia had introduced him at a café in La Mere, calling him her best friend, insisting he was gay to dispel any suspicion. Ethan had liked Julian, charmed by his wit and stories, never questioning the brunches Sophia spent with him. But the messages on her phone had revealed the truth. Julian was one of her lovers, his words the most vicious, mocking Ethan as pathetic and boring. Julian hadn't seen Ethan yet, his attention on the barista as he ordered a cortado. Ethan's hands trembled, a surge of anger and curiosity warring within him. This was no coincidence. Madrid was far from Paris, but fate had brought them together, and Ethan couldn't let the moment pass. He stood, his chair scraping against the cobblestones, and approached Julian, his voice low but firm. "Julian," he said, the name ablaze on his tongue. Julian turned, his smile faltering as recognition dawned, his eyes widening with a mix of surprise and wariness. "Ethan," Julian said, recovering quickly, his voice smooth but cautious. "What a surprise. What brings you to Madrid?" His casual tone was a spark to Ethan's fury, and he stepped closer, his green eyes blazing. "Don't," he said, his voice trembling with rage. "I know everything, Julian. I saw your messages to Sophia. You were never her friend. You were one of them." The cafe's chatter faded, the world narrowing to the space between them, charged with the weight of betrayal. Julian's smile vanished, replaced by a guarded expression, his hands slipping into his pockets as if to steady himself. For a moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by the distant strum of a guitarist in the plaza. Julian glanced around, as if weighing his options, then gestured to a table. "Let's sit," he said, his tone measured. "You deserve answers." Ethan hesitated, his instinct to lash out warring with his need for truth. He nodded, following Julian to a secluded corner of the cafe, the air thick with the scent of espresso and the tension of a confrontation long overdue. As they sat, Ethan braced himself, knowing that whatever Julian revealed would deepen the wounds. Sophia had left. Julian set his cortado on the table, his fingers drumming lightly, a nervous habit Ethan hadn't noticed in Paris. The cafe's warmth felt oppressive, the chatter of other patrons a cruel backdrop to the storm brewing between them. Ethan leaned forward, his voice low but fierce. "You lied to me," he said. "Sophia said you were gay, her best friend, someone I didn't need to worry about. But you were sleeping with her, mocking me behind my back. Why? What did I ever do to you?" The questions were a plea, a demand for the truth that had eluded him since that fateful night in Paris. Julian's gray eyes met Ethan's, a flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, or regret, crossing his face before he masked it with a sigh. "You're right," he said, his voice steady but softer than Ethan expected. "I wasn't gay. That was Sophia's idea, her way of keeping you off the scent. She wanted to have her cake and eat it too. You, the stable boyfriend, and others, for excitement." The admission was a punch, confirming Ethan's worst fears. Sophia's deception had been deliberate, a calculated performance to maintain her double life. Ethan's hands clenched, his nails digging into his palms, the pain grounding him against the tide of rage. "Why go along with it?" he asked, his voice breaking. "You could have said no. You could have been honest. Instead, you laughed at me, called me pathetic. I trusted you." Julian looked away, his jaw tightening, and for a moment, Ethan saw a crack in his polished facade. "It wasn't about you," Julian said, his voice quieter now. "Sophia was magnetic. She had a way of pulling you in, making you feel like you were the only one who mattered. I fell for it, just like you did." The words were a revelation, painting Sophia as a master manipulator, her charm a weapon she wielded with precision. Ethan thought of her laughter in Florence, her promises under the stars, and realized they'd been part of the same act. "So you just played her game?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. Julian nodded, his eyes distant. At first, it was fun, the secrecy, the thrill. But then I saw how she operated, how she juggled you, me, the others. I got out when I realized she didn't care about any of us, not really. The confession was a double-edged sword, absolving Julian of malice but deepening Ethan's sense of Sophia's betrayal. Ethan's mind reeled, the cafe's walls closing in as Julian's words sank in. Sophia's lie about Julian's sexuality wasn't just a cover, it was a calculated move to disarm Ethan, to ensure he never suspected her affair. He thought of their brunches in Paris, Julian's easy laughter, Sophia's playful nudges, all part of a performance that had fooled him completely. She planned it all, Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper, the realization a weight on his chest. Every moment, every word, it was all a lie. Julian nodded, his expression somber, a rare glimpse of vulnerability. She was good at it, he said. Too good. I thought I was special, you know? But then I saw her with Noah, heard about Lucas, learned about Victor. She was playing us all, Ethan, keeping us in separate orbits so we'd never collide. The gay friend story was just one of her tricks. Ethan's heart ached, the image of Sophia as a puppet master clashing with the woman he'd loved. He remembered her tears in Santorini, her fierce declarations of love, and wondered if any of it had been real. Why mock me? Ethan asked, his voice raw, the memory of Julian's messages. Ethan's so devoted, it's almost pathetic, a fresh wound. Julian winced, his fingers stilling on the table. That was wrong, he admitted. I was angry, caught up in her game. She'd talk about you sometimes, how you were so reliable. It made me jealous, I guess. I lashed out in those messages, but it wasn't really about you. The confession offered little comfort, the jealousy a new layer to the betrayal, revealing Sophia's ability to pit her lovers against each other. Ethan leaned back, his gaze drifting to the Plaza Mayor, where a street performer juggled flaming torches, the crowd cheering. The normalcy of it was jarring, a reminder that the world moved on, oblivious to his pain. I loved her, he said, the words a confession, a lament. I gave her everything, and she turned it into a game. Julian's eyes softened, a rare moment of empathy. We both loved her, in our way, he said. But Sophia doesn't love like we do. She loves the chase, the power. You were her anchor, but anchors get left behind. The metaphor cut deep, a truth Ethan couldn't deny. The conversation dwindled, the air between Ethan and Julian heavy with shared pain and unspoken regrets. Julian finished his cortado, his movements slow, as if reluctant to leave the moment unresolved. I'm sorry, he said, the words genuine but inadequate. Not just for the messages, but for being part of it. I should have walked away sooner. Ethan nodded, his anger ebbing, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. Julian's apology couldn't undo the past, couldn't restore the trust. Sophia had destroyed, but it was a crack of light in the darkness. Ethan stood, his sketchbook tucked under his arm, the Polaroid of Sophia left on the table, a relic he no longer wanted. I don't forgive you, he said, his voice steady but tired. But I don't hate you either. You were just another piece in her puzzle. Julian's lips twitched, a sad smile. Take care, Ethan, he said, and Ethan felt the finality of it, a closing of a chapter that had cost him dearly. He walked out of the cafe, the Plaza Mayor's vibrancy washing over him, a world that felt alien yet alive. As he wandered through Madrid's streets, the sun dipping low, Ethan grappled with the truth. Julian had revealed. Sophia's deception was not just a betrayal but a masterpiece of manipulation, her lie about Julian a cornerstone of her double life. The realization didn't lessen his pain, but it clarified it, giving shape to the chaos. He thought of the Lisbon accident, Noah's arrest, Sophia's flight from justice, and saw her now as a tragic figure, her charm a curse that destroyed everything it touched. Ethan's love for her was a ghost, fading but not gone, and he knew he had to keep moving, to find a way to live with the scars. The Retiro Park loomed ahead, its trees golden in the evening light, and Ethan entered, seeking the quiet of its paths. Madrid was a temporary refuge, but the journey wasn't over. Sophia was still out there, her shadow long, and Ethan needed to understand her endgame, to face the final truths of their story. The encounter with Julian had been a painful gift, a step toward clarity, but the road ahead was uncertain, paved with grief and the faint hope of redemption. As the city's lights began to glow, Ethan walked on, a man forged in betrayal, determined to find his way through the ruins. Chapter 9: The Final Reckoning. Ethan Moreau's soul was a battlefield, scarred by the betrayals that had dismantled his life. The revelations in Paris, Amsterdam, London, Lisbon, and Madrid had stripped away his trust, leaving him a man haunted by the ghost of a love that had never been true. Sophia Laurent's infidelity with Lucas, Victor, Noah, and Julian had shattered his heart, each confrontation revealing a new layer of her deception. The tragic accident in Lisbon, caused by Noah's reckless texting with Sophia, had added a layer of guilt, the death of an innocent woman a stark reminder of the ripple effects of betrayal. Julian's confession in Madrid, that he was never gay, a lie Sophia crafted to disarm Ethan, had been the final blow, exposing her as a master manipulator. Yet, one question lingered, a splinter in Ethan's mind. Why had she done it, and where was she now? Sophia had vanished after the Lisbon accident, her Paris apartment empty, her colleagues unaware of her whereabouts. The police, investigating her role in the crash, had issued a warrant, but she was a phantom, slipping through the cracks of justice. Ethan, unable to let go, had become obsessed with finding her, not for revenge but for answers. A tip from Anna Ribeiro, the Lisbon journalist, had led him to Scotland. Anna had uncovered a financial trail. Sophia had siphoned funds from Apex Marketing Solutions, Victor's firm, and was rumored to be hiding in the Highlands, planning her next move. The news was a shock, painting Sophia as not just a betrayer but a thief, her ambition twisted into something criminal. Ethan arrived in Inverness under a sky heavy with clouds, the Highlands' rugged beauty a stark contrast to his inner turmoil. He rented a car and drove deep into the mountains, following Anna's lead to a secluded cabin near Loch Ness, where Sophia was supposedly lying low. The journey was treacherous, the roads winding through mist-shrouded peaks, but Ethan's resolve was unbreakable. His green eyes, once bright with dreams, were now steely with determination, his dark hair disheveled from days of relentless pursuit. The cabin, if Anna's information was correct, held the key to the final truth about Sophia, a truth Ethan both craved and feared. As he navigated the narrow roads, the weight of his journey pressed on him. Paris, where he'd discovered her infidelity. Amsterdam, where Lucas's betrayal had fueled his hatred. London, where Victor's manipulation had revealed Sophia's complicity. Lisbon, where Noah's recklessness had claimed a life. Madrid, where Julian's confession had exposed her lies. Each city was a chapter in a saga of pain, and this, the Scottish Highlands, would be the final one. Ethan gripped the steering wheel, the rain beginning to fall, a familiar companion in his odyssey of heartbreak. He was ready to face Sophia, to demand the truth, even if it destroyed what little remained of his soul. The cabin emerged from the mist like a specter, a small wooden structure nestled in a clearing by Loch Ness, its windows dark, its chimney cold. The surrounding landscape was wild, jagged peaks, dense pine forests, and the loch's inky waters reflecting the storm clouds above. Ethan parked a distance away, his heart pounding as he approached on foot, the rain soaking his jacket, his boots sinking into the muddy earth. The isolation of the place was palpable, a perfect hideout for someone desperate to disappear. If Sophia was here, she'd chosen a fortress of solitude, a far cry from the glamorous life she'd led in Paris. Ethan circled the cabin, his breath visible in the chilly air, searching for signs of life. A faint glow flickered through a window, a candle or lamp, and his pulse quickened. He knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the silence, and waited, every second an eternity. When no answer came, he tried the handle, finding it unlocked. The door creaked open, revealing a sparse interior, a wooden table, a single chair, a cot in the corner, and a small fireplace. Sophia stood by the window, her auburn hair loose, her hazel eyes wide with shock as she turned to face him. For a moment, time stopped, the weight of their shared history crashing over Ethan like a wave. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice a mix of fear and disbelief, her hands clutching a notebook. She was thinner than he remembered, her face pale, her beauty marred by exhaustion and something deeper, guilt, perhaps, or desperation. Ethan stepped inside, closing the door, the rain's patter muffled but relentless. "You're a hard woman to find," he said, his voice low, laced with a bitterness he couldn't hide. Sophia's gaze darted to the door, as if calculating her escape, but she stayed rooted, her expression shifting to a guarded defiance. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone sharp, the same coldness she'd shown in Paris. Ethan's anger flared, but he kept it in check, his architect's mind seeking the structure beneath her facade. "The truth," he said, stepping closer, his eyes locked on hers. "About you, about the money you stole, about Lisbon, about everything. I've been to hell and back because of you, Sophia. I deserve to know why." The cabin felt smaller, the air thick with the ghosts of their past. Florence, Paris, the promises they'd made and broken. Sophia's lips parted, but no words came, only a heavy silence that confirmed his fears. The truth would be uglier than he'd imagined. Sophia set the notebook on the table, her movements deliberate, as if buying time. The candle's flame cast shadows across her face, highlighting the lines of exhaustion, the weight of her choices. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "It's not safe, Ethan. You don't understand what you're walking into." Her words were a spark to Ethan's curiosity, but he refused to be swayed by her vulnerability, not after everything. "Then make me understand," he said, his voice rising. "You slept with Lucas, Victor, Noah, Julian. You lied about Julian being gay. You stole money from Victor's firm. You're wanted for questioning in a woman's death. Tell me why, Sophia. What was it all for?" Her eyes flickered with something, fear, shame, or both, before she turned away, staring out at the lock, its surface rippling under the rain. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she said, her voice barely audible. "I wanted control, freedom, to be more than just your girlfriend, Ethan, or Victor's employee. I wanted to be untouchable." The confession was a shock, revealing a Sophia driven by ambitions so fierce it had consumed her morality. Ethan's heart ached, the woman he'd loved replaced by this stranger who craved power above all else. She turned back, her eyes meeting his, a mix of defiance and despair. "Victor was the start," she said. "He offered me promotions, opportunities, but there was always a price. Meetings, trips, his bed. I played along, thinking I could use him. But he had power, and I learned to wield it too. Lucas, Noah, Julian, they were my way of taking back control, of proving I wasn't just his puppet." Ethan's stomach churned, her words painting a picture of a woman trapped in a cycle of manipulation, both victim and perpetrator. "And me?" he asked, his voice breaking. "What was I to you?" Sophia's gaze softened, a flicker of the woman he'd known in Florence, but it was fleeting. "You were my safe place," she said, echoing words she'd spoken under the stars. "But safe wasn't enough. I needed more. Excitement, danger, the thrill of being wanted. You were too good, Ethan, too pure. I couldn't be that for you." The admission was a dagger, confirming what Lucas, Victor, and Julian had implied. Ethan's love had been his weakness, a chain Sophia had broken to chase her desires. Ethan's anger surged, a wildfire that threatened to consume him. He stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "And the money?" he asked. "You stole from Victor's firm. You're on the run, hiding in this godforsaken place. What was the plan, Sophia? To disappear with your fortune and leave everyone else to deal with the mess?" Sophia flinched, her defiance crumbling, and for the first time, Ethan saw fear in her eyes, not of him, but of the consequences closing in. She sank onto the cot, her hands trembling, the notebook on the table a silent witness to her secrets. "It was my way out," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Victor's firm was a gold mine, but he controlled everything, my career, my life. I started skimming funds, small amounts at first, then more. I planned to leave, start over somewhere new, where no one could touch me." She paused, her eyes distant, as if seeing that unattainable future. "Lisbon was supposed to be the end game. Noah was bringing me the last of the cash, but then, the accident." Her voice cracked, the weight of Mariana's death a burden she couldn't escape. Ethan's mind reeled, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. The urgency in her messages to Noah, the desperation to meet in Lisbon. It wasn't just an affair, but a heist gone wrong. "You got someone killed," he said, his voice thick with disgust. "Mariana Costa, a teacher, dead because you couldn't wait to get your money. Do you even care?" Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. her face a mask of conflicted emotions. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said. "I told Noah to be careful, but he was reckless. I've been running ever since, trying to figure out what to do." The cabin seemed to shrink, the rain's relentless patter a drumbeat to Ethan's rising fury. He thought of Mariana's memorial, her smiling face, and felt a surge of rage for the innocent life lost to Sophia's greed. "You manipulated everyone," he said, his voice shaking. "Me, Lucas, Victor, Noah, Julian. You played us all, and now you're crying because it fell apart. You're not a victim, Sophia. You're a criminal." The words were a release, a condemnation of the woman he'd loved, and Sophia's head bowed, her silence an admission of guilt. The confrontation reached its breaking point, the cabin a crucible for truths too heavy to bear. Ethan paced, his hands raking through his wet hair, his mind struggling to process the scope of Sophia's actions. She wasn't just unfaithful, she was a thief, a manipulator, a catalyst for tragedy. Yet, as he looked at her, crumpled on the cot, he saw a woman broken by her own ambition, her dreams of power reduced to a fugitive's life in a lonely cabin. The love he'd once felt for her was a ghost, but its echo lingered, making this moment all the more painful. "What now?" he asked, his voice hoarse, the question as much for himself as for her. "You can't run forever. The police are looking for you. Victor knows about the money. Knows facing prison because of you. What's your endgame, Sophia?" She lifted her head, her eyes meeting his, a flicker of the fierce woman he'd known in Paris. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice raw. "I thought I could start over, but every choice I made just buried me deeper. I'm sorry, Ethan, for you, for Mariana, for everything." The apology was a shock, the first genuine remorse she'd shown, but it was too late, too little. Ethan's hands clenched, his anger warring with a pity he didn't want to feel. "Sorry doesn't bring Mariana back," he said. "It doesn't undo the lies, the pain, the lives you've ruined. You broke me, Sophia, and I'll never understand why." He turned to the window, the loch's dark waters a mirror to his despair. The rain had softened, but the storm within him raged on, a tempest of grief, rage, and the faint hope of closure. Ethan knew he couldn't stay. Sophia's fate was her own, a path she'd chosen long before this cabin. He walked to the door, pausing to look back at her one last time. "Turn yourself in," he said, his voice steady but heavy. "It's the only way to stop running." Sophia nodded, a tear finally falling, but she said nothing, her silence a final barrier between them. Ethan stepped into the rain, the highland's vastness swallowing him, and drove away, the cabin fading into the mist. The truth had been unveiled, but it offered no solace, only the certainty that love, once his salvation, was now his greatest wound. Chapter 10. The Scales of Justice. Ethan Moreau's journey through betrayal had carved a hollow in his soul, each revelation a wound that refused to heal. The discoveries in Paris, Amsterdam, London, Lisbon, Madrid, and the Scottish Highlands had stripped away his illusions, leaving him a man forged in the crucible of pain. Sophia Laurent's infidelity with Lucas, Victor, Noah, and Julian had shattered his heart, her calculated lies, Julian's false identity, Victor's coercion, Noah's reckless accident, and her theft of millions, revealing a woman he no longer recognized. The confrontation in the Highlands, where Sophia confessed her manipulative ambition and guilt over the Lisbon accident, had been the final blow, a truth that offered no solace, only closure's bitter sting. Months had passed since that rain-soaked night in Scotland. Sophia, heeding Ethan's advice, had turned herself in, her arrest making headlines across Europe. The police had unraveled her financial crimes, tracing the stolen funds from Victor's firm, Apex Marketing Solutions, to offshore accounts. More damning was her role in the Lisbon accident, where her urgent texts to Noah had distracted him, leading to the death of Mariana Costa, a young teacher. Sophia faced charges of fraud and accessory to vehicular manslaughter, her trial set in Lisbon, a city Ethan had sworn never to revisit. Yet, when the prosecution contacted him, requesting his testimony, he knew he couldn't refuse. The saga that had begun in a Parisian apartment demanded its end in a courtroom. Ethan arrived in Lisbon under a sky bruised with clouds, the city's golden light dimmed by autumn's chill. The Tagus River flowed steadily, its beauty a painful reminder of his last visit, when he'd stood by Mariana's roadside memorial, grappling with the tragedy's weight. Now, he checked into a modest hotel in Baisha, his green eyes weary, his dark hair streaked with premature gray, a testament to the toll of betrayal. The trial was days away, and Ethan spent his time preparing, meeting with prosecutors, and wrestling with his emotions. Testifying against Sophia meant facing her again, reliving the love and lies that had defined him, a prospect that filled him with dread and resolve. As he walked through Lisbon's streets, the Alfama's colorful facades and fado music a distant hum, Ethan felt the weight of his role in this final chapter. Sophia's actions had destroyed lives, his, Mariana's, Noah's, and justice demanded accountability. Yet, a part of him, the part that remembered Florence's starry nights, ached for the woman he'd loved, wondering if she could ever find redemption. The courtroom loomed, a crucible where truth would be weighed, and Ethan steeled himself, knowing this was his last chance to lay the past to rest. The courtroom in Lisbon's Palace of Justice was a study in contrasts, grand marble columns and polished wood juxtaposed with the raw emotion of human conflict. Ethan sat in the witness gallery, his hands clasped tightly, his heart pounding as the trial began. The room was packed, journalists, Mariana's grieving family, Sophia's former colleagues from Apex, and curious onlookers drawn by the scandal. The air was thick with anticipation, the weight of justice palpable as the judge, a stern woman with silver hair, called the session to order. Sophia sat at the defendant's table, her auburn hair pulled back, her face pale but composed, dressed in a simple gray suit that belied her former glamour. Ethan's breath caught at the sight of her, a flood of memories, Florence, Paris, the Highlands, clashing with the reality of her crimes. Her hazel eyes, once vibrant with mischief, were dulled by fatigue, but they met his briefly, a flicker of recognition passing between them. Ethan looked away, his chest tight, the love he'd once felt now a ghost that haunted him. The prosecution laid out the case, Sophia's embezzlement of €2.3 million from Apex, facilitated through falsified contracts and offshore accounts. Her role in the Lisbon accident, where her texts to Noah had distracted him, leading to Mariana's death. The defense argued mitigating factors, Victor's coercive influence, Sophia's lack of intent in the accident, but the evidence was damning. Ethan listened, his architect's mind cataloging the details, each fact a brick in the wall of Sophia's guilt. When the prosecutor called him to the stand, the room seemed to shrink, all eyes on him, a man whose love had been weaponized against him. Ethan took the oath, his voice steady but heavy, and faced the court. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed man named Duarte, began with questions about his relationship with Sophia, her behavior, and the night he discovered her infidelity. Ethan recounted the messages on her phone, the confrontations across Europe, and the Highlands cabin, his words measured but laced with pain. The courtroom was silent, the weight of his testimony a tangible force, Sophia's face unreadable as she listened to the unraveling of her secrets. Duarte's questions grew sharper, delving into Sophia's manipulation and the Lisbon accident. "Mr. Moreau," he asked, "can you confirm the nature of the messages between Ms. Laurent and Noah, and their impact on the events of May 12, 2025? Ethan nodded, his throat tight, and described the texts he'd seen in the police report. Sophia's urgent pleas for Noah to hurry to Lisbon, her promises of a special night, sent minutes before the crash. They were intimate, Ethan said, his voice faltering and distracting. Noah was texting her when he veered into Mariana's car. The courtroom stirred, murmurs rippling through the gallery, Mariana's family visibly shaken. Ethan's gaze drifted to them, a mother clutching a photo of her daughter, and guilt surged within him, as if his love for Sophia had set this tragedy in motion. Duarte pressed on, asking about Sophia's financial crimes. Ethan recounted her confession in the Highlands, her plan to steal from Victor's firm, to flee with the money, to start over. She said it was her way out, he said, his voice raw. She wanted freedom, power, but it cost a life. The defense attorney, a sleek woman named Sophia Mendez, cross-examined him, her tone gentle but probing. "Mr. Moreau, isn't it true that Ms. Laurent was under pressure from Victor Langston, her employer? Could her actions have been coerced?" Ethan hesitated, remembering Victor's manipulative arrogance in London, but shook his head. "She made choices," he said. "She could have stopped, but she didn't. She played everyone. Victor, Noah, me. She wasn't a victim." The words were a condemnation, a final severance of the bond he'd once cherished, and Sophia's head bowed, her composure cracking. Testifying was a crucible, each word a piece of Ethan's heart laid bare. He stepped down, his legs unsteady, and returned to the gallery, the weight of his role in Sophia's fate pressing on him. The prosecution called other witnesses, Victor, who testified to the financial damage, Noah, via video from prison, who blamed Sophia's texts, Ana Ribeiro, the journalist, who detailed the investigation. Each testimony built the case, but Ethan's words lingered, a personal betrayal that gave the charges human weight. As the day ended, Ethan left the courtroom, the city's autumn light casting long shadows, his soul raw but resolute. The trial stretched over days, each session a marathon of evidence and emotion. Ethan attended every one, a silent observer, his presence a testament to the life Sophia had upended. The prosecution painted her as a calculating criminal, her fraud and negligence in the accident undeniable. The defense argued her remorse, her surrender to authorities, and Victor's influence, but the evidence was overwhelming. Sophia took the stand, her voice steady but hollow, admitting her crimes but pleading for leniency, citing her fear of Victor and her unintended role in Mariana's death. Ethan watched, his heart torn between pity and justice, her words a faint echo of the woman he'd loved. The night before the verdict, Ethan couldn't sleep, his hotel room a prison of memories. He stood on the balcony, the Tagus River shimmering under a crescent moon, Lisbon's lights a constellation of hope and loss. He thought of Mariana, whose life had been stolen, of Noah, facing years in prison, of Victor, whose empire had crumbled, of Lucas and Julian, whose betrayals had cost them Ethan's trust. And Sophia, whose ambition had led to this, a courtroom, a verdict, a life forever altered. Ethan's love for her was a scar, no longer bleeding but ever present, a reminder of what he'd lost and what he'd gained: resilience, clarity, the strength to face truth. He visited Mariana's memorial one last time, a quiet roadside shrine near Sintra, its flowers fresh, its candles burning. Kneeling, he whispered an apology, not to Sophia, but to Mariana, whose death had become his burden. The act was cathartic, a release of the guilt he'd carried since Lisbon. As he drove back, the stars above the highlands came to mind, the night Sophia had promised forever, a promise now broken but no longer defining him. The verdict would come tomorrow, and with it, the end of their saga. Ethan was ready, not for closure, but for freedom, the freedom to move forward, to rebuild, to live beyond the shadow of betrayal. The courtroom was a crucible on verdict day, the air thick with tension as the judge prepared to speak. Ethan sat in the gallery, his hands clasped, his heart a drumbeat of dread and hope. Sophia stood at the defendant's table, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the judge, a woman stripped of her former power. The gallery was silent, Mariana's family clutching each other, the weight of justice a tangible force. Ethan's testimony, alongside the evidence, had built an unassailable case, but the outcome remained uncertain, a final test of the truth he'd fought to uncover. The judge's voice was clear, her words measured but resolute. Sophia Laurent, on the charge of fraud, this court finds you guilty. On the charge of accessory to vehicular manslaughter, this court finds you guilty. The verdicts landed like thunder, the gallery erupting in murmurs, Mariana's mother sobbing quietly. Sophia's shoulders slumped, her composure shattered, but she didn't cry, her eyes distant, as if already retreating from the world. The judge sentenced her to 7 years for fraud and 3 years for manslaughter, to be served concurrently, with the possibility of parole in 5 years. Ethan's breath caught, the verdict a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Justice had been served, but it didn't erase the pain, didn't bring Mariana back, didn't restore the love he'd lost. As Sophia was led away, her hands cuffed, she glanced at him one last time, her eyes holding a silent apology, a plea for understanding. Ethan met her gaze, his expression unreadable, and then looked away, the final thread of their connection severed. The courtroom emptied, the crowd dispersing, but Ethan lingered, the weight of the moment anchoring him to the bench. Outside, Lisbon was alive, its streets bustling, its sky clear for the first time in days. Ethan walked to the river, the Tagus sparkling under the sun, and stood at its edge, the city's pulse a reminder of life's persistence. The trial was over, Sophia's fate sealed, and Ethan was free, not from pain, but from her shadow. He thought of Florence, of the dreams they'd shared, and let them go, like leaves on the water. The future was uncertain, but it was his, a canvas waiting for new lines, new hopes. As he turned from the river, a faint smile touched his lips, the first in months, a sign that healing, however distant, was possible. Chapter 11. The Dawn of Healing. Ethan Moreau's heart had been a battlefield, scarred by the betrayals that had unraveled his world. The revelations in Paris, Amsterdam, London, Lisbon, Madrid, and the Scottish Highlands had stripped away his trust, leaving him a man forged in the crucible of pain. Sophia Laurent's infidelity with Lucas, Victor, Noah, and Julian, her calculated lies, her role in the tragic Lisbon accident, and her conviction for fraud and manslaughter had marked a saga of loss that culminated in a Lisbon courtroom. The trial's verdict, 7 years in prison, had been a bitter closure, severing the last threads of a love that had once defined him. Yet, even as justice was served, Ethan remained adrift, his soul yearning for a path beyond the shadows of betrayal. Lisbon had been a turning point, but it offered no peace. The city's vibrancy, its sunlit streets and fado melodies, felt like a mockery of his grief. Ethan knew he couldn't return to Paris, where every corner held memories of Sophia's deception. He needed a place untouched by their past, a sanctuary to heal the wounds that still bled. Santorini, Greece, emerged as a beacon, a place he'd visited years ago with college friends, its whitewashed cliffs and azure seas a canvas of serenity. The island held no trace of Sophia, only memories of simpler times, and Ethan booked a flight, driven by a desperate hope to reclaim himself. The journey to Santorini was a blur, the plane's hum a counterpoint to Ethan's turbulent thoughts. He landed in Thera under a sky of endless blue, the island's beauty shocked to his senses after months of rain-soaked cities. At 29, Ethan was a shadow of the ambitious architect he'd been, his green eyes dulled by grief, his dark hair streaked with gray, a testament to the toll of betrayal. He rented a small villa in Oya, its terrace overlooking the caldera, and stood there as the sun set, the sea ablaze with gold and crimson. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of peace, a whisper that healing was possible, even if the road was long. Ethan's plan was simple: to breathe, to reflect, to rediscover the man he'd been before Sophia's lies. He carried a sketchbook, untouched since Madrid, hoping to draw again, to reconnect with the architect's vision that had once fueled his dreams. But the weight of his journey, Lucas's betrayal, Victor's manipulation, Noah's recklessness, Julian's deception, Sophia's conviction, lingered, a burden he couldn't yet shed. As he settled into the villa, the island's quiet beauty balm to his soul, Ethan vowed to face his pain, to find a way forward, one step at a time. Santorini's charm enveloped Ethan, its narrow streets lined with bougainvillea, its churches crowned with blue domes, a world apart from the chaos he'd left behind. He spent his days wandering, the island's rhythms soothing his fractured spirit. He walked the cliffs of Fira, sipped coffee in Imaravilli's cafes, and watched fishermen haul their nets in Amudi Bay. The locals, warm and unhurried, greeted him with smiles, unaware of the storms he'd weathered. Yet, even in this paradise, the past clung to him, a shadow that surfaced in quiet moments. At night, alone in the villa, Ethan wrestled with memories. The Polaroid of him and Sophia in Florence, now discarded, haunted him, its image of their radiant smiles a lie that stung. He thought of the Lisbon courtroom, Sophia's pale face as the verdict was read, her fleeting glance of apology. The pain of her betrayal, her affairs, her theft, her role in Mariana Costa's death, was a weight he carried, but so was the love he'd felt, a love that had been real, even if one-sided. Ethan's sketchbook remained blank, his creativity stifled by grief, a reminder that healing was not linear, but a jagged path through memory and loss. One afternoon, while exploring Oya's labyrinthine alleys, Ethan stumbled upon a familiar face, Elena Marquez, a friend from his college days in Boston. Elena, a photographer with a warm smile and dark curls, had been part of the group that visited Santorini years ago, their laughter echoing through the island's nights. She stood outside a gallery, arranging prints of the caldera, and her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Ethan Moreau," she called, her voice a mix of surprise and delight. "What are you doing here?" Ethan froze, the the sight of her a bridge to a simpler past, and managed a smile, his first genuine one in months. They embraced, the reunion a spark of light in Ethan's darkness. Over wine at a cliffside taverna, Elena shared her story. She'd moved to Santorini to pursue photography, finding solace in the island's beauty after her own heartbreak. Ethan hesitated to share his, the wounds too raw, but Elena's kindness drew him out. He spoke of Sophia, the betrayals, the trial, his voice steady but heavy, the words a release he hadn't known he needed. Elena listened, her eyes soft with empathy, and squeezed his hand. "You're here now," she said. "That's a start." The moment was a lifeline, a reminder that connection, however tentative, was possible. Elena became a constant in Ethan's days, her presence a balm to his wounded soul. She invited him to her studio, a sunlit space filled with photographs of Santorini's landscapes and portraits of its people. Her passion for her craft was infectious, reminding Ethan of the architect he'd been, the one who dreamed of buildings that would stand for centuries. Elena sensed his struggle and encouraged him to draw, to let the island inspire him. "You're not broken, Ethan," she said one evening, as they watched the sunset from her balcony. "You're just rebuilding." Her words struck a chord, and Ethan began to sketch, tentative lines at first, then bolder strokes. He drew the caldera's curves, Oya's whitewashed arches, the sea's endless blue, each sketch a step toward reclaiming his vision. The act was cathartic, a way to process the pain without words. Elena praised his work, her enthusiasm genuine, and for the first time, Ethan felt a spark of pride, a glimmer of the man he could become. Their friendship deepened, rooted in shared vulnerability, but Ethan was cautious, his trust scarred by Sophia's lies. Elena, sensing his hesitation, never pushed, offering companionship without expectation. One night, they joined a group of locals for a feast in Kamari, a beachside village. The table was laden with souvlaki, tzatziki, and retsina, the air filled with laughter and bouzouki music. Ethan, usually reserved, found himself smiling, even dancing with Elena under the stars, her laughter a melody that eased his heart. The moment was fleeting, but it was real, a reminder that joy could exist alongside grief. As they walked back along the beach, the waves lapping at their feet, Elena spoke of her own healing, how Santorini had taught her to embrace life's imperfections. "You'll find your way," she said, her voice soft. "You're stronger than you know." Ethan wanted to believe her, but the past still whispered doubts. He thought of Lucas's betrayal, Victor's arrogance, No's recklessness, Julian's lies, and Sophia's conviction, each a lesson in the fragility of trust. Yet, Elena's friendship, the island's beauty, and his own sketches were proof that he could rebuild, not as the man he'd been, but as someone new. The night sky stretched above, vast and starry, and Ethan felt a shift within him, a tentative hope that the future held more than pain. As weeks passed, Ethan's healing gained momentum, but it was not without setbacks. Santorini's beauty was a mirror, reflecting both his progress and the pain he still carried. One afternoon, while sketching in Firaz's main square, he overheard a couple speaking French, their accents echoing Sophia's. The sound was a trigger, pulling him back to Paris, to the night he'd discovered her phone, the messages that shattered his world. His pencil snapped, his sketch ruined, and he fled to the cliffs, his breath ragged, the weight of memory crushing him. Elena found him there, sitting on a stone bench overlooking the caldera, his face buried in his hands. She sat beside him, silent, her presence a steady anchor. "It's okay to hurt," she said, her voice gentle. "The past doesn't vanish, it just gets quieter." Ethan nodded, his throat tight, and shared more of his story. The Florence nights, the Paris apartment, the Lisbon trial. Elena listened, her empathy a lifeline, and offered her own scars. A fiancé who'd left her, a career that had faltered. "We're all a little broken," she said. "But that's where the light gets in." Her words, simple yet profound, shifted something in Ethan. He realized that healing wasn't about erasing Sophia, but integrating her betrayal into his story, a chapter that shaped him but didn't define him. He began to write, not sketches, but letters, to Sophia, to Lucas, to Mariana's family, none to be sent, but a way to release the anger and guilt. The act was liberating, a purging of the poison that had festered. Elena read one, her eyes misty, and hugged him. "You're finding your way," she said, and Ethan believed her, the spark of hope growing brighter. The island continued to work its magic, its sunsets a daily promise of renewal. Ethan joined Elena on photoshoots, carrying her equipment, learning her craft, their banter a new rhythm in his life. He sketched more, his designs bolder, infused with Santorini's light and resilience. The past remained, but its grip loosened, each day a step toward a future he could claim. Elena's friendship was a cornerstone, a reminder that trust, though fragile, could be rebuilt, one moment at a time. Months in, Santorini transformed Ethan, not into the man he'd been, but into someone stronger, tempered by loss and hope. His sketches filled a new portfolio, designs inspired by the island's curves and resilience, a testament to his rediscovered passion. He and Elena grew closer, their friendship a foundation that hinted at something more, though Ethan was cautious, his heart still tender. They spent evenings on her balcony, sharing stories and silences, the caldera a canvas for their dreams. "Stay," Elena said one night, her voice soft but earnest. "Santorini suits you." Ethan smiled, the idea tempting, a seed planted for a future he could imagine. He visited Mariana's memorial one last time, not in Lisbon, but in his mind, a ritual of forgiveness, for Sophia, for himself. The guilt he'd carried, the sense that his love had sparked the tragedy, faded, replaced by acceptance. He wrote a final letter, not to anyone, but to the sea, casting it into the waves off Amudi Bay, a symbolic release of the past. The act was a turning point, a declaration that he was more than his pain, more than Sophia's betrayal. His sketches became plans, a vision for a small studio in Oia, a place to design and live, rooted in the island's light. One morning, as the sun rose over the caldera, Ethan stood on his villa's terrace, a new sketch in hand, a house, not for Sophia, but for himself, a symbol of his rebirth. Elena joined him, her camera slung over her shoulder, and they watched the dawn, the sky a tapestry of pink and gold. "You're going to be okay," she said, her smile warm, and Ethan nodded, feeling the truth of it. The betrayals, the trial, the loss, they were part of him, but so was this moment, this island, this chance to begin again. As he walked into Oia's streets, the day unfolding with promise, Ethan felt a lightness he hadn't known in years. Santorini had given him more than refuge, it had given him himself, a man who could love, trust, and dream again. The future was uncertain, but it was his, a canvas of possibility, painted with the colors of hope. The sea sparkled below, endless and alive, and Ethan stepped forward, ready to embrace whatever came next, a survivor of betrayal, a builder of dreams. Chapter 12. The Light After the Storm. Ethan Moreau stood on the threshold of a life he'd never dared imagine, a life born from the ashes of betrayal. The saga that had begun in a Parisian apartment, Sophia Laurent's infidelity with Lucas, Victor, Noah, and Julian, her web of lies, her theft, and her role in the tragic Lisbon accident, had reshaped him, stripping away his innocence but forging a resilience he hadn't known he possessed. The confrontations across Europe, culminating in Sophia's trial and conviction in Lisbon, had been a crucible, burning away the man he'd been and leaving a survivor, tempered by pain but open to hope. Now, 3 years later, in the spring of 2028, Ethan had found his sanctuary in Santorini, Greece, an island that had become his home, his muse, and his salvation. The whitewashed cliffs of Oia, cascading to the azure caldera, were a daily reminder of beauty's persistence, even after loss. Ethan, now 32, had built a life here, far from the rain-soaked cities of his past. His dark hair, once streaked with premature gray, was touched by the sun, his green eyes bright with purpose. He owned a small architectural studio in Oia, a sunlit space where he designed homes inspired by the island's curves and light. His sketches, once tentative, were now bold, each line a testament to his reclaimed passion. The wounds of Sophia's betrayal, Lucas's disloyalty, Victor's manipulation, Noah's recklessness, Julian's lies, and the death of Mariana Costa remained as scars, but they no longer defined him. Santorini had taught him to live with them, to find joy in the present. His mornings began with coffee on the studio's terrace, the sea sparkling below, the air fragrant with bougainvillea. Elena Marquez, his friend-turned-partner, was a constant presence, her laughter a melody that anchored him. Their relationship had blossomed slowly, rooted in shared vulnerability and trust, a love that felt different from Sophia's, steady, honest, untainted by deceit. Elena, a photographer whose images captured Santorini's soul, had become his collaborator, their work intertwining as seamlessly as their lives. Together, they'd built a community, their studio a hub for artists and dreamers, a place where Ethan felt he belonged. Yet, the past was never fully gone. Ethan occasionally thought of Sophia, now serving her sentence in a Portuguese prison, her 7-year term a consequence of her choices. The Lisbon trial, where he'd testified against her, had been a painful closure, but questions lingered. Had she found remorse, or was she still the woman who'd craved power above all? As Ethan sipped his coffee, the caldera glowing under the dawn, he felt a quiet gratitude for the life he'd forged. A life that proved betrayal, though devastating, was not the end. Today, however, the past would reach out one last time, in a way he hadn't expected. The morning unfolded with the rhythm of routine. Ethan worked in the studio, sketching a villa for a local couple, the design blending Santorini's traditional arches with modern elegance. Elena was nearby, editing photos for an upcoming exhibition, her dark curls catching the sunlight streaming through the open windows. Their banter was easy, a dance of familiarity, but Ethan's focus wavered when a courier arrived, delivering a plain envelope with a Portuguese postmark. His heart skipped, a flicker of unease stirring as he recognized the handwriting, Sophia's. He stepped onto the terrace, the envelope unopened, his hands trembling slightly. Elena noticed, her eyes softening with concern, but she gave him space, sensing the weight of the moment. Ethan sat, the caldera's vastness a grounding force, and tore open the letter, the paper crisp but heavy with history. Sophia's words spilled across the page, her elegant script a haunting echo of the woman who'd once promised him forever. The letter was dated a month ago, written from her cell, a confession, an apology, and a farewell that Ethan hadn't anticipated. Dear Ethan, it began, I've spent 3 years in this place, surrounded by walls that mirror the ones I built around my heart. I've had time to think, to face the person I became, and I'm writing to you not for forgiveness, but for truth. Sophia recounted her descent, her ambition, her fear of being ordinary, her surrender to Victor's power, her manipulation of Lucas, Noah, Julian, and Ethan himself. She admitted the theft, the lies, the reckless texts to Noah that led to Mariana's death, each word laced with a remorse Ethan hadn't expected. I destroyed you, she wrote, and I destroyed myself. I see that now, and I'm sorry, not just for the pain, but for the love I betrayed. The letter was a shock, a window into a Sophia stripped of her defenses, grappling with the wreckage of her choices. She spoke of Mariana, whose death haunted her dreams, and of Ethan, whose goodness she'd envied and resented. You were my safe place, she echoed, a phrase from their Highlands confrontation, but I couldn't live in safety. I needed chaos, and it consumed me. She ended with a plea for him to live fully, to find joy, and a promise to carry her guilt as her sentence, beyond the prison walls. Ethan's eyes blurred, tears falling not for love, but for the tragedy of a woman who'd lost herself to her own desires. Ethan set the letter down, the caldera's beauty a stark contrast to the turmoil within. Sophia's words were a final reckoning, a mirror to the pain he'd carried and the healing he'd fought for. He thought of Paris, the night he'd discovered her phone, the messages that shattered his world, of Amsterdam, where Lucas's betrayal had fueled his rage, of London, where Victor's arrogance had revealed Sophia's complicity, of Lisbon, where Mariana's death had become his burden, of Madrid, where Julian's confession had exposed her lies, and of the Highlands, where Sophia's guilt had offered no solace. The letter was a coda, a chance to close the book, but it demanded a choice, to hold on to anger or to let it go. Elena joined him, her presence a steady anchor, and he handed her the letter without a word. She read it, her eyes widening, then softening, and set it aside, taking his hand. What do you feel? She asked, her voice gentle. Ethan exhaled, the question a key to a locked door. Sad, he said, his voice raw. Not for her, not really, but for what we all lost. For Mariana, for the people we could have been. He paused, the weight of Sophia's remorse settling over him. I don't hate her anymore. I don't know if that's forgiveness, but it's enough. The admission was a release, a shedding of the bitterness that had tethered him to the past. Elena squeezed his hand, her smile a beacon. "You're free," she said, and Ethan felt the truth of it, a lightness he hadn't known since Paris. Forgiveness wasn't absolution, it was permission to move forward, to live without the shadow of Sophia's crimes. He thought of Mariana's memorial, the candles burning for a life lost, and vowed to honor her not with guilt, but with a life well lived. The letter, once a burden, became a gift, a final truth that set him free. They returned to the studio, the day unfolding with purpose. Ethan sketched, his lines bolder, infused with the island's resilience, while Elena prepared for her exhibition, their work a shared dream. The letter remained on the terrace, a relic of a chapter closed, its words no longer a wound but a reminder of Ethan's strength. Santorini's light poured through the windows, a promise of renewal, and Ethan felt a surge of gratitude. For Elena, for the island, for the man he'd become. The days following the letter were a turning point, Ethan's healing no longer a hope but a reality. His studio thrived, his designs sought after by locals and visitors alike, each project a testament to his rediscovered passion. He and Elena collaborated on a community project, a cultural center in Fira, blending his architecture with her photography, a space for artists to gather and create. The work was fulfilling, a way to give back to the island that had saved him, and it deepened their bond, their love a quiet strength that grew with each shared moment. Santorini's rhythms became Ethan's own. He joined locals for feasts in Camari, danced under the stars, and sailed the caldera with Elena, her laughter a melody that drowned out the past. Their relationship was not without challenges, Ethan's scars made trust a cautious act, but Elena's patience, her own history of healing, bridged the gaps. One evening, as they watched the sunset from Scaros Rock, Ethan took her hand, his voice steady. "I want this," he said, gesturing to the island, to her, to their life. "All of it, with you." Elena's eyes glistened, her smile radiant, and they kissed, the caldera ablaze with light, a moment that felt like a vow. Ethan's thoughts of Sophia faded, not erased but integrated, a chapter that had shaped him but no longer held power. He wrote one final letter, not to her, but to himself, a reflection on his journey, Paris's pain, Lisbon's tragedy, Santorini's salvation. He burned it in a small ceremony on Amudi Bay, the ashes scattering over the sea, a ritual of closure. The act was symbolic, a declaration that he was more than his past, a man who could love, trust, and dream again. His sketches evolved, his designs now infused with hope, a vision of homes that would shelter lives as Santorini had sheltered his. The island's community embraced him, their warmth a reminder that connection was possible, even after betrayal. Ethan and Elena hosted dinners at their villa, the table laden with souvlaki and retsina, their laughter mingling with the sea's song. The past was a distant echo, its lessons carved into Ethan's soul, but the present was vibrant, a canvas of possibility. He was home, not just in Santorini, but in himself, a man rebuilt from the ruins of love. Years later, Ethan's life in Santorini was a testament to resilience, a story of light emerging from darkness. His studio had grown, a beacon for architects and artists, its terrace a place where dreams took shape. He and Elena had married in a quiet ceremony on the cliffs, their vows spoken under a canopy of stars, the caldera their witness. Their love was a partnership, built on trust and shared purpose, a contrast to the chaos of Sophia's betrayal. They traveled together, Ethan's designs reaching Athens and beyond, Elena's photographs gracing galleries worldwide, their work a celebration of beauty and connection. The cultural center in Fira thrived, a legacy of their commitment to Santorini's spirit. Ethan mentored young architects, sharing the lessons of his journey, resilience, creativity, the courage to rebuild. He spoke of betrayal not as a wound, but as a teacher, a force that had led him to this life. Elena, his partner in every sense, captured their story in a series of photographs, from ashes to light, exhibited in the center, a visual narrative of loss and redemption that moved all who saw it. One spring morning, as Ethan stood on the terrace, now a father to a daughter named Marina, after Mariana Costa, he felt a profound gratitude. Marina, with Elena's curls and his green eyes, played nearby, her laughter a song of hope. The caldera sparkled, the island's beauty unchanged, a constant in a life transformed. Sophia's letter, now a distant memory, had been the final key, unlocking a future Ethan had built with intention and love. He no longer thought of her, but her shadow had shaped him, a reminder that even the deepest pain could lead to light. As he sketched a new design, Marina at his side, Elena joined them, her camera ready, her smile a mirror to his own. The sea stretched to the horizon, endless and alive, and Ethan knew this was his legacy, not the pain of Paris, but the life he'd created in Santorini, a life of purpose, love, and unbreakable hope. The story that had begun in betrayal had ended in triumph, a testament to the human heart's capacity to heal, to love, to begin again. Chapter 13. The Echoes of Secrets. Ethan Moreau's life in Santorini was a tapestry of light woven from the threads of a painful past. 3 years had passed since the Lisbon trial, where Sophia Laurent's betrayal, her affairs with Lucas, Victor, Noah, and Julian, her theft of millions from Apex Marketing Solutions, and her role in the tragic death of Mariana Costa, had culminated in a 7-year prison sentence. The journey through Paris, Amsterdam, London, Lisbon, Madrid, and the Scottish Highlands had been a crucible, forging Ethan into a man who carried scars but no longer bled. In Santorini, he had found healing, love, and purpose, building a life that stood as a testament to resilience. At 32, Ethan was an architect of renown on the island, his Oya studio a beacon for dreamers, its terrace overlooking the caldera's azure expanse. His dark hair, once dulled by grief, shimmered with sunlit streaks, his green eyes bright with a quiet strength. He and Elena Marquez, his partner and now wife, had created a sanctuary, a cultural center in Fira, a home filled with their daughter Marina's laughter, a love rooted in trust and shared dreams. Sophia's letter, received a year ago, had been a final closure, her remorse a key that unlocked Ethan's forgiveness, not for her, but for himself. The past was a distant echo, its lessons integrated into a life of purpose. Yet, peace was fragile, a delicate balance that Ethan guarded with care. He spent his days designing tomes that blended Santorini's timeless beauty with modern elegance, his sketches a reflection of the island's resilience and his own. Elena's photography adorned their studio, her images of the caldera and its people a mirror to their shared vision. Marina, now 2, was a whirlwind of joy, her curls and green eyes a blend of her parents, her presence a daily reminder of life's capacity for renewal. Ethan felt whole, but the scars of betrayal, Lucas's disloyalty, Victor's manipulation, Noah's recklessness, Julian's lies, and Sophia's crimes, remained, a quiet reminder that the past could resurface. One spring morning, as Ethan sketched on the terrace, the caldera glowing under a cloudless sky, a stranger's arrival disrupted the rhythm of his day. A woman, elegant but weary, approached the studio, her dark sunglasses and tailored coat out of place among Oya's casual vibrancy. She introduced herself as Clara Villar, a private investigator from Lisbon, and her words sent a chill through Ethan. "I'm here about Sophia Laurent. There's something you need to know." The name, once a wound, now stirred unease, a signal that the past was not as buried as he'd believed. Ethan led Clara into the studio, his heart pounding, the air thick with the scent of paint and sea salt. Elena was at the cultural center, preparing for an exhibition, leaving Ethan alone to face this unexpected intrusion. Clara's presence was a jolt, her polished demeanor masking a weariness that hinted at a long journey. She sat, removing her sunglasses to reveal sharp blue eyes, and opened her portfolio, pulling out documents stamped with official seals. "I've been investigating Sophia's case for a year," she said, her Portuguese accent crisp. "There's more to her crimes than the court uncovered, and it involves you." The words were a shock, pulling Ethan back to the Lisbon courtroom, Sophia's pale face, the verdict that had closed a painful chapter. He leaned against a workbench, his hands steady but his mind racing. "She's in prison," he said, his voice low. "The trial is over. What could possibly involve me now?" Clara's lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze unwavering. "Sophia didn't act alone," she said. "The money she stole, 2.3 million euros, was only part of a larger scheme. We've uncovered evidence of a partner, someone who helped her funnel the funds, and they're still active, using accounts linked to your name." Ethan's breath caught, the accusation a blade to his fragile peace. He thought of Sophia's letter, her remorse, her confession of guilt, and wondered if it had been another lie. "That's impossible," he said, his voice rising. "I had nothing to do with her crimes. I testified against her." Clara nodded, her expression empathetic but firm. "I believe you," she said. "But your identity was used. Bank accounts, shell companies, all tied to your name, opened during your relationship. Someone wanted you implicated if things went wrong." The revelation was a gut punch, suggesting Sophia's manipulation had depths he hadn't fathomed, a betrayal that lingered even in her absence. Clara slid a document across the table, a bank statement listing transactions under Ethan Moreau, dated during his years with Sophia. The sums were staggering, tied to offshore accounts he'd never seen. "We think her partner is still moving money," Clara said. "And they're here, in Santorini, possibly watching you." The words sent a chill down Ethan's spine, the island's beauty suddenly menacing, its cliffs hiding secrets. He thought of his life with Elena, Marina's safety, and felt a surge of protectiveness, mingled with anger at Sophia's enduring shadow. Ethan's mind reeled, the studio's warmth oppressive as Clara's words sank in. The idea that Sophia's crimes had ensnared him, even after her conviction, was a fresh wound, a reminder of her manipulative genius. He thought of their years together, Paris's starry nights, Florence's promises, and realized she'd been weaving a web even then, using his name as a shield. The possibility of a partner, still active and in Santorini, was a threat he couldn't ignore, not with Elena and Marina to protect. "Who is it?" he asked, his voice low, a dangerous edge to it. "Victor? Lucas? Someone else?" Clara shook her head, her expression grim. "We don't know," she admitted. "The accounts are layered, the trail obscured. Victor's been cleared. He lost too much to be involved. Lucas and Julian are accounted for, living quietly. No's in prison. It's someone outside her known circle, someone she trusted implicitly." The ambiguity was maddening, a puzzle Ethan's architect's mind ached to solve. He agreed to help Clara, not for Sophia, but for his family, for the life he'd built. "What do you need from me?" he asked, his resolve hardening. Clara outlined her plan: monitor local transactions, watch for suspicious activity, and use Ethan's presence to draw the partner out. "They might approach you," she warned, "thinking you know more than you do. Be careful." The idea of being bait was unsettling, but Ethan nodded, his thoughts on Marina's laughter, Alina's smile. He couldn't let the past destroy what he'd fought to create. After Clara left, promising to stay in touch, Ethan stood on the terrace, the caldera's beauty now tinged with menace, its vastness hiding a threat he couldn't see. That evening, he told Elena everything, his voice steady but heavy, the studio's candlelight casting soft shadows. Elena listened, her dark eyes wide, then took his hand, her strength a mirror to his own. "We'll face this together," she said, her voice firm. "This is our home, Ethan. No one takes that from us." Her resolve was a lifeline, grounding him in the face of uncertainty. They agreed to be vigilant, to protect Marina, and to trust Clara's investigation. As night fell, the island's stars a canopy above, Ethan felt a mix of fear and determination, ready to confront whatever shadows Sophia's past had cast. Days turned to weeks, Santorini's spring unfolding in bursts of color and light, but Ethan's peace was fractured. He and Elena went about their lives, designing, photographing, raising Marina, but vigilance shadowed their steps. Clara's updates were sparse, her investigation uncovering cryptic transactions but no clear suspect. Ethan scanned crowds in Oi's markets, scrutinized clients at the studio, his trust strained by the possibility of a hidden enemy. The island, once a sanctuary, felt like a stage, its beauty a backdrop to a drama he couldn't control. One evening, during a crowded exhibition at the Fira Cultural Center, the shadow took form. The event was a celebration of Elena's latest series, Light Over Water, her photographs drawing locals and tourists alike. Ethan mingled, Marina in his arms, his smile practiced but his eyes alert. A man approached, unremarkable yet striking, mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and a quiet intensity, his accent a blend of British and something unplaceable. He introduced himself as Daniel Reed, a collector interested in Elena's work, but his gaze lingered on Ethan, a knowing glint that set Ethan's nerves on edge. Later, as the crowd thinned, Daniel cornered Ethan near a display, his voice low. "You're a hard man to find, Ethan Moreau," he said, his smile cold. "Sophia spoke highly of you, but she left out how persistent you are." The mention of Sophia was a shock, confirming Ethan's suspicions. He stepped closer, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What do you want?" Daniel's smile widened, a predator's grin. "I'm the one who made her dreams possible," he said. "The money, the accounts, the escape plan. But you, Ethan, you were the wild card. You ruined everything." The revelation was a thunderbolt, identifying Daniel as Sophia's partner, the architect of her financial crimes. Ethan's mind flashed to the bank statements, the accounts in his name, and realized Daniel had used him as a scapegoat, a shadow to hide behind. "You framed me," Ethan said, his voice trembling with rage. Daniel shrugged, unrepentant. "Insurance," he said. "Sophia's idea, actually. But now, I need those accounts closed, and you're going to help me, or your pretty little family pays the price." The threat to Elena and Marina was a line crossed, igniting Ethan's protective fury, but he kept his composure, knowing Clara needed evidence to act. Ethan's confrontation with Daniel was a turning point, a moment where the past and present collided, demanding a stand. He contacted Clara, relaying every detail, his voice steady but urgent. She was already in Santorini, tracking leads, and moved quickly, coordinating with local police to monitor Daniel. Ethan and Elena, now fully united, devised a plan to lure Daniel into revealing more, using a staged meeting at the studio to record his confession. The risk was high, but Ethan refused to let fear dictate his life, not after all he'd overcome. The meeting was set for a stormy evening, the caldera roiling under dark clouds, a fitting backdrop to the drama unfolding. Ethan waited in the studio, a hidden recorder ready, his heart pounding as Daniel arrived, his demeanor smug but wary. Elena stayed nearby, watching Marina, her presence a silent strength. "You want the accounts closed," Ethan said, his voice calm, playing the role of a reluctant ally. "Tell me how it worked, and I'll help." Daniel, sensing leverage, spoke freely, detailing the scheme. How he'd met Sophia through Victor, how they'd planned the theft, how Ethan's name was a convenient shield. "She was brilliant," he said, a twisted admiration in his voice, but too soft in the end. Turning herself in was her mistake. The confession was damning, captured on tape, but Daniel's instincts kicked in, his eyes narrowing. "You're playing me," he hissed, stepping closer, a knife glinting in his hand. Ethan's pulse surged, but he held his ground, years of pain fueling his courage. "You're done, Daniel," he said, his voice steady. "The police have everything." As if on cue, Clara and officers burst in, subduing Daniel, his threats dissolving into curses. The studio, once a sanctuary, was a battlefield, but Ethan stood tall, the victory bittersweet, a final exorcism of Sophia's shadow. In the aftermath, Daniel was arrested, facing charges of fraud and conspiracy, his confession sealing his fate. Clara thanked Ethan, her respect evident, and promised the accounts in his name would be cleared. As the storm cleared, Ethan and Elena stood on the terrace, Marina asleep inside, the caldera calm under a crescent moon. "It's over," Elena said, her arms around him, and Ethan nodded, feeling the truth of it. Sophia's legacy, once a wound, was now a closed chapter, her partner's defeat a final justice. Ethan's life, his love, his family, his dreams, was his own, a triumph over the past, a beacon of light in Santorini's endless summer. Chapter 14. The Sister's Shadow. Ethan Moreau's life in Santorini was a testament to the heart's capacity to heal, a mosaic of joy built from the fragments of a shattered past. 4 years had passed since the Lisbon trial, where Sophia Laurent's betrayal, her affairs with Lucas, Victor, Noah, and Julian, her theft of €2.3 million, and her role in Mariana Costa's tragic death, had culminated in a 7-year prison sentence. The odyssey through Paris, Amsterdam, London, Lisbon, Madrid, the Scottish Highlands, and Santorini had forged Ethan into a man who carried scars but no longer bled. The confrontation with Daniel Reed, Sophia's secret partner, had been a final exorcism, clearing Ethan's name and securing his family's safety. Now, in the summer of 2029, Santorini was his home, a sanctuary of light and love. At 33, Ethan was an architect whose designs captured the island's soul, his Oya studio a haven for creativity. His dark hair, kissed by the sun, framed green eyes that shone with purpose, the premature gray of his past a faint memory. He and Elena Marquez, his wife, had built a life of depth and meaning, a cultural center in Fira, a home filled with their daughter Marina's laughter, and a love that weathered every storm. Marina, now 3, was a whirlwind of curls and curiosity, her presence a daily reminder of life's resilience. Sophia's letter, received 2 years ago, had offered closure, her remorse a bridge to forgiveness, not for her crimes, but for the pain she'd caused. The past was a quiet echo, its lessons woven into Ethan's strength. His days were a rhythm of creation and connection. He designed homes that blended Santorini's whitewashed elegance with modern warmth, each project a reflection of his journey. Alina's photography, exhibited worldwide, adorned their studio, her images a celebration of the island's light. They hosted dinners for friends, sailed the caldera, and watched Marina chase waves on Camari's black sand beaches. Ethan felt whole. The betrayals, Lucas's disloyalty, Victor's coercion, Noah's recklessness, Julian's lies, Daniel's threats, now stories of survival, not defeat. Yet, peace was a delicate balance, and on a sunlit morning, as Ethan sketched on the studio's terrace, a visitor arrived, threatening to unravel it. A woman stepped into the studio, her auburn hair and hazel eyes a haunting echo of Sophia, her presence a jolt to Ethan's serene world. She introduced herself as Isabel Laurent, Sophia's estranged younger sister, her voice soft but weighted with urgency. "I need your help, Ethan," she said, her eyes pleading. "It's about Sophia, and a truth I've kept for too long." The name, once a wound, now stirred curiosity and dread, a signal that the past was reaching out, demanding one final reckoning. Ethan invited Isabel inside, his heart racing, the studio's sunlit warmth a contrast to the unease her presence brought. Elena was at the cultural center, teaching a photography workshop, leaving Ethan to face this echo of Sophia alone. Isabel, in her late 20s, carried a quiet intensity, her resemblance to Sophia uncanny yet softened by a sincerity Sophia had lacked. She sat, clutching her satchel, and spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. "I know what Sophia did to you," she said. "Her affairs, the theft, the accident. I've followed the news, read about the trial. But there's something you don't know, something that might explain why she became who she was." The words were a shock, pulling Ethan back to the Lisbon courtroom, Sophia's pale face, her letter of remorse. He leaned against a workbench, his architect's mind seeking order in the chaos of this new revelation. "Why now?" he asked, his voice steady but wary. "Sophia's in prison. The case is closed. What could possibly matter after all this time?" Isabel's eyes glistened, a tear escaping as she opened her satchel, pulling out a faded journal, its pages worn but cherished. "This is my mother's," she said. "It tells a story about our family, about Sophia, that I've kept secret. I need you to hear it, because she's asking for you, Ethan, and I don't know what to do." Ethan's breath caught, the mention of Sophia's request a jolt to his hard-won peace. He thought of her letter, her confession of guilt, and wondered what more she could want. "She's asking for me," he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. Isabel nodded, her expression pained. "She's up for parole next year," she said. "She's changed, or so she says. She wants to see you, to explain, to make amends. But before you decide, you need to know the truth about why she broke." The journal, Isabel explained, detailed a family trauma, a secret that had shaped Sophia's ambition, her need for control, her descent into betrayal. Isabel's plea was a crossroads, a choice between preserving his peace and confronting a truth that could reframe his past. Ethan's thoughts flickered to Elena, Marina, the life he built, and he felt a surge of protectiveness, mingled with curiosity. "Tell me," he said, his voice resolute, "but I'm not promising anything." Isabel nodded, opening the journal, her fingers tracing the faded ink, and began to read, her voice a bridge to a past Ethan had never known, a past that held the key to Sophia's darkness. Isabel's voice trembled as she read from the journal, each word a thread unraveling the mystery of Sophia's choices. The entries, written by their mother, Claire, chronicled a family fractured by loss and abuse. Sophia and Isabel grew up in a small French village, their childhood overshadowed by their father, Antoine, a charming but volatile man whose temper masked a darker cruelty. Claire's words painted a harrowing picture, Antoine's verbal and physical abuse, his control over the family, and a tragic night when Sophia, at 15, witnessed him strike Claire, leaving her hospitalized. Sophia changed that night, Isabel. Read, her voice breaking. She became driven, desperate to escape, to never be powerless again. Ethan listened, his heart aching, the studio's light dimming as the story unfolded. Claire wrote of Sophia's brilliance, her academic success, her charisma, but also her growing detachment, a shield against vulnerability. When Antoine died in a car accident a year later, Sophia, then 16, vowed to rewrite her life, to become untouchable. She saw power as safety, Isabel said, closing the journal, her eyes meeting Ethan's. That's why she chased ambition, why she manipulated, why she hurt you. She was running from our father's shadow, but she became like him in the end. The revelation was a seismic shift, reframing Sophia's betrayal as a distorted quest for control, rooted in trauma. Ethan thought of her cold laughter in Paris, her confession in the Highlands, her remorse in the letter, and saw them now through a new lens, a woman shaped by pain, her choices a warped reflection of survival. Why didn't she tell me? He asked, his voice raw, the question a plea for understanding. Isabel shook her head, tears falling. She was ashamed, she said. She thought you'd see her as weak. And me, I was too young, too scared to speak up. I failed her, Ethan, and I failed you. The weight of the truth was crushing, a reminder that betrayal was never simple, its roots tangled in unseen wounds. Ethan's anger, long buried, stirred, not at Sophia, but at the father who'd broken her, at the silence that had let her spiral. Yet, he felt a flicker of pity, a recognition of Sophia's humanity, flawed and tragic. Isabel's plea, for Ethan to meet Sophia, to hear her amends, hung in the air, a challenge to his compassion. He stood, pacing the studio, the caldera's vastness a mirror to his turmoil, knowing his decision would define the man he'd become. Ethan's decision weighed on him, a storm brewing within as he grappled with Isabel's request. He needed Alina's perspective, her clarity, and that evening, as Marina slept, he shared everything, the studio's candlelight casting soft shadows. Elena listened, her dark eyes wide, then took his hand, her voice steady. You've built a life beyond her, she said. But if meeting her helps you, or her, find peace, you're strong enough to do it. I trust you, Ethan. Her words were a lifeline, grounding him in their love, a reminder that his choice was his own, not Sophia's to dictate. He contacted Isabel, agreeing to meet Sophia, not in Santorini, but in Lisbon, where she'd be transferred for a parole hearing. The decision was not forgiveness, but compassion, a chance to close the circle with understanding, not anger. Ethan and Elena prepared for the trip, arranging for Marina to stay with friends, their unity a shield against the past's pull. The journey to Lisbon was a return to a city of ghosts, the Tagus River, Mariana's memorial, but Ethan was no longer the broken man who'd left it. He was a husband, a father, an architect of his own destiny, ready to face Sophia with clarity. In Lisbon, Ethan met Isabel at a cafe near the courthouse, the city's autumn light casting long shadows. She was nervous, her gratitude evident, and shared that Sophia had been in therapy, confronting her past, her father's abuse, her own mistakes. She's not the same, Isabel said, hope in her eyes. She wants to make things right, starting with you. Ethan nodded, his heart heavy but resolute, and they walked to the courthouse, where Sophia awaited in a visitor's room. The moment loomed, a final reckoning, and Ethan steeled himself, knowing this was not about rekindling love, but about honoring the man he'd become, a man who could face pain with grace. The visitor's room was stark, its gray walls a contrast to Santorini's vibrancy. Sophia sat at a table, thinner, her auburn hair cropped, her hazel eyes clear but weary. She stood as Ethan entered, her expression a mix of fear and hope, and for a moment, time collapsed, Paris's memories flooding back. Ethan, she whispered, her voice trembling, thank you for coming. He nodded, sitting across from her, his voice calm but firm. I'm here to listen, Sophia. Tell me what you need to say. The air was thick with history, a shared past now reframed by truth, and Ethan braced himself for the final piece of their story. Sophia's voice was soft but steady, her words a confession and a plea. She spoke of her therapy, her confrontation with her father's abuse, how it had fueled her need for control, her fear of vulnerability. I hurt you because I was afraid to be weak, she said, tears falling. You loved me, Ethan, and I couldn't handle that. I used Lucas, Victor, Noah, Julian, even Daniel, to feel powerful, but it was a lie. Mariana's death, the money, it was all my failure, and I'll carry that forever. Her remorse was raw, a mirror to the letter, but now spoken face to face, its weight undeniable. Ethan listened, his heart torn between pity and the scars she'd left. He thought of Mariana, of his own journey, of Elena and Marina waiting for him, and felt a clarity settle over him. I don't hate you, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I did, for a long time, but I've built something real, something you can't touch. I'm here because I believe you're trying, but this is the end, Sophia. I wish you peace, but my life is mine now. The words were a release, a final severance of the bond that had once defined him, and Sophia nodded, a tearful smile breaking through. She handed him a small envelope, a letter for Isabel, a promise to rebuild their sisterhood. Tell her I'm sorry, she said, and thank you, Ethan, for being better than I deserved. He took it, standing, the room's starkness fading as he stepped toward the door. Sophia's parole hearing was tomorrow, her future uncertain, but Ethan's was clear. A return to Santorini, to Elena, to Marina, to a life of light. He left the courthouse, the Tagus River sparkling under the sun, and met Elena at the cafe, her embrace a homecoming. It's done, he said, and she smiled, her love a beacon. Back in Santorini, Ethan gave Isabel the letter, her gratitude a bridge to her own healing. He and Elena resumed their life, the studio thriving, Marina's laughter a song of joy. The island's beauty was unchanged, its cliffs and sea constant, a reminder that love, trust, and hope could endure any storm. Ethan sketched a new design, a home for a family, its lines infused with the strength he'd found. The past was a story, not a chain, and Ethan was its author, writing a future of light, love, and unbreakable resilience. Chapter 15, The Legacy of Redemption. Ethan Moreau's life in Santorini was a symphony of light, composed from the echoes of a painful past. 5 years had passed since the Lisbon trial, where Sophia Laurent's betrayal, her affairs with Lucas, Victor, Noah, and Julian, her theft of €2.3 million from Apex Marketing Solutions, and her role in Mariana Costa's tragic death, had culminated in a 7-year prison sentence. The odyssey through Paris, Amsterdam, London, Lisbon, Madrid, the Scottish Highlands, and Santorini had transformed Ethan, burning away his illusions but forging a man of resilience and hope. The confrontations with Daniel Reed, Sophia's secret partner, and Isabel, her estranged sister, had been final reckonings, clearing his name and reframing Sophia's actions through the lens of her traumatic past. Now, in the autumn of 2030, Ethan's life was a testament to the heart's capacity to heal. At 34, Ethan was an architect whose designs captured Santorini's timeless beauty, his Oya studio a haven for creativity and community. His dark hair, sun-kissed, framed green eyes that glowed with purpose, the scars of his past, premature gray, sleepless nights, now faint memories. He and Elena Marquez, his wife, had built a life of depth and joy, a cultural center in Fira, a home filled with their daughter Marina's laughter, and a love that weathered every storm. Marina, now 4, was a vibrant blend of her parents' spirits, her curls bouncing as she chased seagulls on Camari's beaches. Sophia's legacy, her letter of remorse, her parole hearing, her childhood trauma, had faded into a quiet chapter, its lessons woven into Ethan's strength. His days were a rhythm of creation and connection. He designed homes that married Santorini's whitewashed elegance with modern warmth, each project a reflection of his journey from betrayal to redemption. Elena's photography, celebrated globally, adorned their studio, her images a love letter to the island's light. They hosted art workshops, sailed the caldera, and watched sunsets from Scaros Rock, Marina's hand in theirs. Ethan felt whole. The betrayals, Lucas's disloyalty, Victor's coercion, Noah's recklessness, Julian's lies, Daniel's threats, Sophia's crimes, now stories of survival, not chains. Yet, on a crisp autumn morning, as Ethan reviewed plans on the studio's terrace, a letter arrived, its contents threatening to disrupt his hard-won peace. The letter, postmarked from Athens, bore an unfamiliar seal, a laurel wreath encircling a dove. It was from a lawyer named Maria Katsaros, representing a foundation called the Mariana Costa Fund, established in Sophia's name to support education for underprivileged children. The fund, Maria wrote, had been seeded with recovered assets from Sophia's theft, a condition of her parole, and Ethan was named as a potential trustee, per Sophia's request. Your testimony in Lisbon inspired this, the letter read. Ms. Laurent believes you can guide her redemption. The words were a shock, pulling Ethan back to the courtroom, Sophia's pale face, and the woman he'd once loved, now reaching out through a legacy he hadn't expected. Ethan set the letter down, the caldera's vastness a grounding force as he processed its implications. Sophia's name, once a wound, now stirred a complex mix of emotions: pity for her trauma, respect for her attempted amends, and wariness of her lingering influence. The Mariana Costa Fund was a surprise, a gesture that honored the teacher whose death had haunted Ethan, but his role as a trustee was a responsibility he hadn't sought. He thought of Lisbon, the courtroom's tension, Sophia's tearful apology in the visitor's room, and wondered if this was her final act of redemption or another manipulation. Elena joined him, her photography workshop finished, and read the letter, her dark eyes widening. This is unexpected, she said, her voice soft but steady. What do you want to do? Ethan exhaled, the question a mirror to his turmoil. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me wants to walk away, to keep our life untouched. But Mariana's name, it feels like a call, a chance to do good. Elena nodded, her hand squeezing his, her trust a beacon. We'll figure it out together, she said. If it's right, you'll know. Her support was a lifeline, grounding him in their shared strength. Ethan contacted Maria Katsaros, arranging a meeting in Athens to learn more. The decision to travel was cautious, driven by a desire to honor Mariana and understand Sophia's intentions. He and Elena planned a family trip, bringing Marina, turning the journey into an adventure. The ferry from Santorini to Piraeus was a reflective pause, the Aegean Sea stretching endlessly, its waves a metaphor for Ethan's journey, calm on the surface, turbulent beneath. Athens awaited, a city of history and hustle, its Acropolis a symbol of endurance. As the ferry docked, Ethan felt a mix of anticipation and dread, knowing this trip would test the peace he'd fought for. In Athens, they settled into a hotel near Plaka, its cobblestone streets alive with tavernas and bouzouki music. Ethan met Maria at her office, a sleek space overlooking Syntagma Square. She was a warm, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, her gray hair pulled back, her eyes sharp with purpose. The fund is real, she said, presenting documents detailing its mission: scholarships, school supplies, teacher training, all in Mariana's name. Sophia insisted on your involvement, Maria added. She said you're the only one she trusts to keep it honest. The words were a jolt, a reminder of Sophia's complexity, and Ethan's heart raced, the past and present converging in a city far from Santorini's light. Maria's explanation clarified the fund's scope, but it also raised questions. Why had Sophia chosen Ethan, a man she'd betrayed, to carry her legacy? And who else was involved? The documents listed other trustees, names Ethan didn't recognize, but one stood out: Ana Ribeiro, the Lisbon journalist who'd uncovered Sophia's financial trail years ago. The coincidence was startling, a thread connecting Ethan's past to this new venture. Maria arranged a meeting with the trustees in Thessaloniki, where the fund's first project, a community school, was launching. Ethan agreed, sensing the journey was more than administrative, a path to understanding Sophia's final act. The trip to Thessaloniki was a family adventure, Elena and Marina exploring the city's Byzantine walls while Ethan prepared for the meeting. Thessaloniki, Greece's northern gem, was vibrant yet grounded, its waterfront alive with students and street musicians. The meeting was held in a renovated school, its classrooms buzzing with children, the air fragrant with chalk and hope. Ethan entered, his heart heavy with memories of Mariana, whose passion for teaching echoed in the fund's mission. Ana Ribeiro greeted him, her familiar sharp features softened by a warm smile, her presence a bridge to Lisbon's pain. Ethan, Ana said, embracing him, I never thought we'd meet again like this. She explained her involvement. After the trial, Sophia had contacted her through Isabel, seeking to make amends by funding education, a cause Ana championed. The other trustees included a retired teacher and a philanthropist, but Ana's revelation was a shock. Lucas, Ethan's former friend and Sophia's lover, was a silent contributor, his wealth quietly supporting the fund. "He's changed," Anna said, sensing Ethan's tension. "He wants to make things right, but he's not here. He thought you'd refuse if you knew." The news was a gut punch, Lucas's name a trigger to Amsterdam's betrayal, his smug confession of the affair. Ethan's hands clenched, anger flaring, but Anna's calm presence steadied him. "This isn't about him," she said. "It's about Mariana, about the kids who'll benefit. You decide what role you play." The school's opening ceremony began, children singing, their voices a reminder of the stakes. Ethan watched, his heart torn between resentment and the fund's potential, knowing his choice would define his legacy as much as Sophia's. The ceremony was a celebration, but Ethan's mind churned, Lucas's involvement a shadow over the fund's light. He and Elena discussed it that night, their Thessaloniki hotel room quiet, Marina asleep in a crib. "I don't trust him," Ethan said, his voice low, the memory of Amsterdam's cafe, Lucas's casual betrayal, still sharp. Elena nodded, her eyes steady. "You don't have to," she said. "But this fund isn't about Lucas or Sophia. It's about you, about what you believe in. Can you do this for Mariana?" Her words were a clarion call, cutting through his anger, reminding him of the teacher whose death had marked his journey. Ethan agreed to join the fund, not as a trustee, but as a consultant, designing schools that embodied Mariana's spirit, spaces of learning and joy. The decision was a compromise, allowing him to contribute without entangling his life with Lucas's shadow. Anna arranged a meeting in Crete, where the next project was planned, and Ethan, Elena, and Marina traveled south, the island's rugged beauty a new chapter in their adventure. Crete's olive groves and ancient ruins were a contrast to Santorini's cliffs, its warmth a mirror to Ethan's growing resolve. In Chania, a coastal town, Ethan met the fund's team, their passion infectious. The project, a rural school for refugee children, was ambitious, its design a challenge Ethan embraced, sketching plans that blended Cretan stone with open, light-filled spaces. But the past resurfaced when Lucas appeared, unannounced, at a planning session. He was older, his blonde hair thinning, his arrogance replaced by a quiet humility. "Ethan," he said, his voice tentative, "I owe you an apology. I was a coward, a fool. I'm here to help, not to intrude." The words were sincere, but Ethan's anger flared, years of hurt surging to the surface. The confrontation was heated, Ethan's voice low but fierce. "You slept with her, Lucas. You laughed at me. Why should I believe you've changed?" Lucas met his gaze, unflinching. "Because I lost everything too," he said. "My pride, my friends, myself. This fund is my way back, like Santorini was yours." The admission was a shock, revealing a man humbled by his own mistakes. Elena, watching, squeezed Ethan's hand, her presence a reminder of his strength. Ethan didn't forgive, not fully, but he nodded, agreeing to work together for the fund's sake, a tentative step toward reconciliation. The Crete project became a turning point, a fusion of Ethan's architectural vision and the fund's mission. He and Lucas worked uneasily, their collaboration professional but strained, yet the school took shape, its classrooms filled with children's laughter, a tribute to Mariana's legacy. Ethan's designs were celebrated, the fund gaining traction across Greece, its scholarships transforming lives. Elena's photographs documented the journey, her images a narrative of hope, exhibited in Athens and beyond. Marina, ever curious, joined site visits, her presence a reminder of why Ethan fought, to build a world where she could thrive. Back in Santorini, Ethan reflected on the journey, the studio's terrace a sanctuary once more. The Mariana Costa Fund had been Sophia's redemption, but it was also his, a chance to honor a life lost, to reconcile with a past that had shaped him, to forge a legacy of good. Lucas's apology, though not fully accepted, had softened Ethan's anger, a step toward healing old wounds. He thought of Sophia, now paroled, living quietly in France, her sister Isabel by her side, their bond mending. Ethan felt no need to see her again, her chapter closed, but he was grateful for the fund, a bridge between their pain and a brighter future. One evening, as the caldera glowed under a harvest moon, Ethan and Elena hosted a fundraiser for the fund, their villa alive with friends, music, and Marina's giggles. Anna arrived, her pride evident, and shared news. The fund had secured international support, ensuring its growth. Ethan spoke, his voice steady, honoring Mariana, Sophia's intent, and the team's dedication. This is about second chances, he said, his eyes on Elena, for all of us. The crowd applauded, the night a celebration of resilience, love, and purpose. As Ethan stood with Elena, Marina in his arms, the sea stretching to the horizon, he felt a profound gratitude. The betrayals, the trial, the threats, they were part of him, but so was this moment, this family, this legacy. Santorini's light was his guide, a promise that from pain could come beauty, from loss could come love. Ethan's story, begun in a Parisian apartment, ended not in closure, but in creation, a life, a fund, a future forged in the fire of redemption. Wow, what a powerful reflection on Ethan and Sophia's story. Their journey certainly took us through a wide range of emotions. It's fascinating how different aspects of their experience can resonate with each of us. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and encouraging others to connect.